Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 1, 2, 3, 4 good brothers. Ha 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 ha! Making his return to the temple. The man who I usually have to yell at to get anything done, and the man who has Ein but is not one. Good brother Einbrecht.
Good evening.
We have the man making hardcore games for hardcore gamers. Good brother Jeremy.
Sundeath is upon us.
And the man holding all the contracts and the man of wealth and taste. Good brother JT.
It's good to be bad.
And of course, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence. Good brother Xanatrix.
See, the secret is my baning keeps him in check, so all of you should be thanking me.
Thank you, Zan.
I'm sure we may or may not have some people showing up as the night goes on, because that's how this works apparently.
Hi.
So
Hi.
when it comes to the GeekWatch, we've tackled a lot of subjects, but we haven't done. It's been a fair bit since we did one that was centered in discussions about writing and just about storytelling. Some previous examples, of course, being the cardinal sins of writing that we've talked about, or the whole thing we did on silent protagonists, which you have no idea how much shit I got for having the gall to say that Link should stop being a silent protagonist in future Zelda games.
Oh my.
I think a talking Link would be awesome.
Yeah, I think so.
Legitimately,
too.
I would enjoy a talking like that. Don't get me wrong, I love the Breath of Fire series, but Silent Ryu annoys the crap out of me.
Well, obviously we go into detail in that episode, but the problem that I have with, say, Silent Ryu in Breath of Fire or Silent Link in the more recent Zelda games is the fact that there is way too much background for them to be a player surrogate.
Yeah, at this point, Link has his own identity, so...
Yep.
But that is, of course, Rails.
Yeah. But for this one, we are talking about the bad guys, the bandits, the bastards, and some of the people who try to be bastards but end up being buffoons. Because because this week our topic at hand is sympathy for our devils. Pleased to meet you all. I hope you guessed my name.
No,
But what is puzzling you is the nature of my game.
No, man. Never.
It's a song I have not heard in a very long time.
Aside from their disco phase, I've always been more of a Stones guy than a Beatles guy.
Same here. Same here.
I won't give my opinion on the
agree on that one. I can't agree on that one.
I won't give my opinion on the Beatles because I'm pretty sure it'll get me lynched. I'm just saying.
I won't give my opinion on that because I just like them all.
Mm-hmm.
Fair.
Well,
Nothing wrong with that.
except for the White Album. I don't like the White Album.
I'm not talking...
Yeah, that's a good album. I don't know what you're talking about.
Gently weeps. Come on. Continue.
Of course, I could also bring
We're
up
talking the Black Album at this point. We're in Scum and Villainy.
I don't. White is used as a color of death in Japan and other places. So
Red is also used as color of death in Japan. There are a lot of colors for death in Japan, Monk.
And of course, there's also the fact that for Russians, white is the color of death.
That's a bad joke.
You were the one who the other day brought up the whole thing of select all images with.
Hold up. I'm gonna let you finish.
Select all images with finished snipers.
There we go. See, I had to make the joke first. I had to. I just didn't have a microphone to drop.
Yeah. Also, you're not black enough to do a Kanye West impression.
You're only saying that because you're black.
Fuck off.
Fuck yourself.
Sorry, the cloning machine isn't finished.
You know, the fact that you're trying is commendable.
But
you're already doing a better job than most people if you're trying to create a cloning machine.
Also, I don't want to hear that song from Weird Al when it's finished. But getting back onto the rails while Zan over there giggles like a goblin. When it comes to villainy, obviously it takes a whole lot of forms, and some of them are better or worse than others. But both the good and the bad villains we end up remembering for better and for worse for some reason. And for this particular episode, I'd like to explore it, and to kind of set the groundwork, I'd like to do a round table, just going over the first villain that you can remember that in your mind stuck in there for one reason or another. And I'll start with you, Einbrecht, because alphabetical order.
Fair enough. That would be Luca Blight from Suikoden 2.
I can certainly see why. Especially as somebody who we've all had our fair share of familiarity with Suikoden 2, but I'm guessing for you it was just the level of cruel and fucked up he was.
Yes, that's through multiple playthroughs as well, and you notice things about him too. You did not notice the first go around, and I went, "Oh no, he's crazier than I originally thought."
Mm-hmm. And it's funny you bring that up because a lot of folks try and play defense for villains, which we'll get into later, because of their unfortunate backstory, which Luca certainly had, but the pendulum can swing too far the other way.
Oh yes, he's proof of that. That's the funny thing too. Like for Luca, in my case, it never made me feel sympathy for him. It just made me understand him, and I went, "Oh, that's why you're evil."
Even at the end of it, he's laughing at how it took all of those armies coming together to take him out.
Yup.
And Jeremy, how about you?
Let's see. When I was little, of course, 80s cartoons were a thing, and the Purple Pie Man of Porcupine Peak is just probably the most evil thing to Strawberry Shortcake that there is. But legitimate, like things that I knew were villains, but it wasn't a scary thing. Like I think the first scary thing was Freddy Krueger for me. But that was more of a scary thing, not a villain thing. I think my first understanding of a villain was Darth Vader. And to a degree, I don't think I had awareness enough was, Sauron, because Dad was reading Lord of the Rings to us.
Yeah, I can certainly see it.
But that would take a level of awareness to get the villain that Sauron was. Mostly my brain was being entertained by a hobbit traipsing the landscape.
Yeah. JT, what about you?
Could you skip me? Just give me 1 more minute.
All right, Zan, you're up.
I can remember it very clearly. playing into the wee early morning hours as 6-year-old me on my Super Nintendo. A grand RPG where you go across the world with your intrepid heroes to take down a dark empire and eventually, well, deities themselves. You may all be thinking Final Fantasy VI, but you're goddamn wrong, because the first villain I ever noticed and understood is the goddess Tyr from Breath of Fire 1.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That bitch, I still hate that bitch to this fucking day.
Mm-hmm. Miria is no holds barred evil. That bitch is cruel.
For me, I have to kind of split this because the villains that stuck out to me in different media stuck out to me in different ways. I will start with animation because I grew up with the Oh, you got something, JT?
Yeah, I got one.
All right, what do you got?
Yeah, I got a really good one that really stayed with me. Legato Blue Summer from Trigun.
Oh.
I mean, he was absolutely terrifying, and he almost never spoke. He just stood there with that blank look on his face, and he could just decimate everything. This is both in the anime series and the manga, but I'm talking about the anime series. He could just completely murder an entire crowd of people with a mere thought. Mm-hmm. He had this he was like above humanity. He had this almost like demonic demigod thing going on because he was just so overpowered, and there was no conceivable way of countering his control over people. Mm-hmm. He was soft spoken. He was charismatic at the same time, but he was also nihilistic and nihilistic and a loyal soldier at the same time who embraced death in the very end, simply to further his master's campaign of terror against the protagonist. And he has the most sinister theme song ever. When the distortion, when that creepy little do just starts pacing across the screen. You don't even see him on screen. You hear that music, and the chill goes down your spine like something wicked this way comes. Mm-hmm. It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
Good.
For me, I do find it funny that when it came to early villains within animation, some people might bring up the Joker, especially given recent news. Rest in peace, Conroy. But for whatever reason, the villains that I ended up gravitating to, both as a little kid and even into my adulthood, have always been the chess masters. A very early one that stuck to me, and this is going to be a deep cut for a lot of fans.
I think I know where you're going.
Let me tell you about a story that took place on a world that had already jumped forward in time about 2,000 years, where the man who almost destroyed the world is now being seen as the quote unquote good man, who just the presence of his voice sticks with me to this day. I am referring to the Magic Emperor Galleon from the Lunar games.
Nice.
Just the way that he had gone on both he could go between both sides of the fence in such a natural way had stuck with me, and I probably, when I had entertained the idea of voice acting, I did use some of his lines to help me out. I had no plans on furthering voice acting because I wasn't moving to California to do it, and because of the over pushing when it came to stage acting, I had burned out. But when it came to animation, I grew up in the Disney Renaissance like most, but there were always two villains that in one form or another would always stick with me. One of them is Shere Khan.
Yeah.
Tiger from Jungle Book, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, that was a good villain. I remember him.
Yeah.
Just the way that he is relaxed and composed while talking with, say, the snake, and you just know that he's just cats will often play with their food, and Shere Khan is no exception. But the bigger one was Jafar.
Jafar is a phenomenal Disney villain.
Goodbye, ex-Prince Ali.
Yeah. And of a lot of the films from the Disney Renaissance, Aladdin is my favorite. One because of it being a kick-ass movie in and of itself, and two, I'd say it had some of the more interesting games during that Virgin era. And I'm referring to both the Genesis and the SNES version.
Right. Both of them were really good games.
Genesis version was a little bit unforgiving.
Yeah, died a
The
lot.
Genesis itself was jank.
Yeah, it was an unforgiving system.
I mean, it was jank, but I think that's part of what we loved about it.
Yeah.
And of course, now we have a whole bunch of fun things that came from it.
Yeah. I will note when it comes to live action, if somebody were to ask me, a lot of people have this idea that the best villain in the entirety of Trek is Khan Noonien Singh.
On.
While I like him to death, there is one who was so good he ended up being too good for his own good.
I know who you're going for.
Gul Dukat.
Exactly.
Yes.
Oh, dude. Legitimately, Gul Dukat is... Oh, man. He is such a stellar character from Star Trek. Between him and Garrick, I think they were my two of my top... easily, if not my top two of my top three characters.
Yeah. And those two, especially Dukat, but Garrick also. But Dukat, even more so, I think people easily go to Garrick because of just the intrigue of the character, but Dukat had a lot of villainy, even though there was, of course, a soul behind the villainy. And those two characters are part of the reason that DS9 is my favorite of all this.
Legitimately, between those two and Sisko and Bashir and Kira and Odo and Quart, so many good characters in that show.
The funny thing about DS9 is the bit of controversy due to the fact that a lot of its success was by looking at the edicts that Roddenberry had and not doing that.
Because Roddenberry's edicts had gotten boring and stale at that point.
Well, they had gotten those edicts are the reason why a lot of people do not like the first two seasons of The Next Generation, because he was overseeing those seasons until the strike happened, and he got ran out.
Yep.
But the fact that decision was made, one of course helped DS9 stand out, and two, it serves as a prime example of the design by gospel attitude that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
One we hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm back.
Welcome back.
Following the rules is, while admirable, not always necessary, and sometimes to your detriment as a creator.
It can certainly be that when you follow the rules slavishly.
Yes.
Rules are meant to be followed and also meant to be broken when necessary. That's why, even when famous authors such as Brandon Sanderson say you should keep a strict rule set to whatever powers you have in your system, they also have that little caveat of unless there is an extremely good and relevant reason to break them. Don't break them willy-nilly, but make the break mean something.
Yeah,
Don't
there
break
should
it
be.
for the sake of breaking.
Or doing it for its own sake. The pendulum swings both ways. And when it comes to villains, obviously for me and I'd say for a few others, there is the pattern of the chess master archetype. And I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I think the appeal is this idea of somebody who has a degree of authority but knows exactly how to use it.
How to be effective, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sort of the lawful evil archetype, to call it something.
Yeah.
Mm.
And obviously, the big example that some people will come to is Xanatos from Gargoyles. There's a reason why the Xanatos Gambit is a thing.
Yes.
I knew you were eventually going to bring that one up.
But I'd say another big example of that kind of thing is one of my favorite Marvel villains, Victor Von Doom.
Oh, dude, legitimately, one of the greatest characters to come out of Marvel. Period.
What man hath wrought, let no god put asunder.
Because the thing is, the sole reason why a man like Doom wants the level of power that he desires is because he is Doom and he is better than you.
That's right.
He also wants to save his mother from hell.
Well,
You know.
that's where you get into the whole thing of different interpretations. But the key thing with Doom is
His megalomania.
megalomania and sheer he has unbridled arrogance, but not unbridled hubris.
Yeah, one of my favorite interactions with Doom is actually during one of the Skrull invasions, where he turns up to help the good guys figure out how to detect the Skrulls, just because he doesn't want some other NIMBY villain just taking over the place. He's like, no, if anyone's going to conquer Earth, it's going to be me. Here's how you stop them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Doom has canonically conquered and ruled the Earth twice, and gave it back twice because he got bored.
I'm serious, man. I love that character. He's such an absurdity. It's great.
Yeah, and
It is still narcissism if you are the best, pork chop, but it's justified narcissism at that point.
yeah, and but that doesn't mean that other types of villains can't shine in other ways.
Sure.
I think let's consider for a moment one of the ones that's on the screen right now for the stream themselves, and that is Dio Brando.
Dio.
Now, I have seen some argue that Dio in both Phantom Blood and Stardust Crusaders is one-dimensional as a villain. Now, for the purposes of this, I'm going to put aside the stuff that he put into motion after his death. So Stone Ocean, we're putting that in the bubble and we're putting that in the corner.
And Oreo Vento.
Yes.
Sorta.
I'm putting that in the corner because it's something that was set in motion after his death, and not things that he was directly involved with. The whole thing with Dio as somebody who ended up getting lucky because after coming from the bottom of the rung. I mean, he was in a abusive bottom of the barrel household before he just happened to come across the Joestar family, and a lot of the way he carries himself in Phantom Blood before he became a vampire was not too far removed from a villain you would see in a classical opera. Mm-hmm. Just the man who would dedicate his entire life to destroying someone.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, a lot of it is due to the fact that he felt because of the gifts that he had. I mean, he was charismatic. He was good at sports. He was very intelligent, and yet his mindset is because of some sort of loyalty, he has to play babysitter to this wimpy ass Jonathan motherfucker. Because, well, let's face it, Jonathan in the early moments of Phantom Blood was a bit of a pussy.
Well, I mean, he was a skinny, scrawny little kid. It isn't until after the fucking time skip that he's goddamn tank.
Mm-hmm. But because of that, it's I think for a character like him, it's only natural to take the idea of becoming a vampire and having a body that is far past the limits of his human body, just to acquire the level of power that he wants. Dio is somebody who always wants power, and
yes.
The funny thing is that when he becomes the Dio that we see in Stardust Crusaders, in part he is playing up the idea that he sees himself as above humanity for certain, but
and yet he took Jonathan Joestar's body.
Pretty much. And if you guys had to guess at it, why do you suppose someone like Dio would go to such lengths to keep himself hidden? Just with the persona that he's developed over that span of time.
I can't even begin to guess why Dio would hide himself. Just because he's so obnoxious, he's so out there.
He kept himself hidden long enough for him to develop powers he thought would counter the Joestar bloodline. He acknowledges that the Joestars are better than him simply because of the fact that he took Jonathan's body. He acknowledges that, yes, Jonathan Joestar beat me even when I was a vampire. So if I take Jonathan Joestar's body, then I'll be unequaled. But then he's got to consider, well, Jonathan had a kid. And Jonathan's kid killed vampires way stronger than me, especially one that could evolve into anything.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Cars. And so he's like, well, then I need to have the perfect plan, the perfect idea to destroy the Joestar bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he hid. Most simply, he's fucking scared.
In a lot of stories, you have a villain who is trying to either control fate or find a way to escape it. Some of them happen to be one-eyed bastards managing an entire mythology. Looking at you, Odin.
Oh, Oh, the new Thor Ragnarok. Or not
No,
Thor
no, no,
Ragnarok.
no, no. I'm not saying that because of that game coming out. I'm talking about in the original myths.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Odin's entire reason that he sacrificed an eye to get knowledge from Yggdrasil was not only for the runes, but to try and stop Ragnarok itself.
Because Ragnarok is his fated moment of death.
And the end of most gods.
Mm-hmm.
Why it means Twilight of the Gods.
But as far as the other gods who would die in it, he doesn't give a shit about them.
No, he just wants people to rule over if he can avert fate.
Mm-hmm. The moment one of his Valkyries does something that he doesn't like, he has them banished.
Yep. Are we talking about the Nibelungenlied? The story of Nibelung?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
And specifically the story of Brunhilde.
Mm-hmm. I don't think all evil stems from fear. I don't agree with that, Leviathan.
No, it can, but truth be told, any form of evil can stem from one of the seven deadly sins, there's a reason why you have multiple circles of hell in the Divine Comedy.
I would say that evil more often stems from excess. To be excessively prideful, excessively envious, to be excessively fearful, to be excessively wroth.
Yeah. When it comes to that sort of pride, let's consider the likes of one of my favorite tragic stories in Castlevania. I'm specifically referring to Lament of Innocence with this. Matthias Kronkfist. And truth be told, I do think that at some level, Lament of Innocence is still canon, even with the Netflix series.
Yes, it is.
I mean, they all but say it when asking why somebody with the name Belmont would be in Transylvania, because that doesn't sound like a Romanian adjacent name. But for those who Zan, did you play Lament of Innocence? Because if you did, I'd rather you be the evangelist.
I played Lament of Innocence when it first came out.
But do you remember the story of Leon and Matthias?
Barely. It'd be better for you to waltz down this lane.
Yeah. Leon Belmont and Matthias Kronkfist were originally best friends who had fought in the Crusades together. Leon was a masterful soldier, and Matthias was a strategist. Both were very good at it, and both had fought in the name of God during the Crusades. However, during one of their excursions, when they came back, Matthias's, I believe it was his beloved or his wife, had passed away, and that broke Matthias
and caused him to curse God.
And in the process of that, turning to alchemy and discovering the Crimson Stone, which he used on himself. The Crimson Stone can allow one to absorb the souls of vampires, but also carries its curse. And in his particular case, if you were to give him one of the deadly sins, I'd say it would probably be wrath. The whole reason that he ended up turning was because he had done all of that in the name of God, and his quote unquote reward was losing his love. and for that end, he chooses the path to curse God.
What did he actually? I'm trying to remember because it's been so long. Did she actually die? Or was he? Did he think she was?
She died of. It's mentioned in the prologue, but she died of plague.
Oh,
Yeah, a disease got her.
Are we talking about Kronkvist's wife or Leon's?
Kronkvist.
Elizabetha was turned into a vampire. Or was going to be turned into a vampire, I should say.
That was the whole thing with Leon. Matthias's love had died long before the story had taken place.
correct. That's why he was so angry.
Well, I'm reading it here. Elizabetha Kronkvist was his wife that died, and he was going to turn her into a vampire.
That may have been the plan, but it wasn't. He may have considered that after the fact, after he had made and used the Crimson Stone.
Yes. Well, what happened was Elizabetha died. He wanted to. He devised a plan in mourning to take revenge on God by becoming a vampire and then trying to bring his wife back. And then he tricked Leon into getting him the Crimson Stone by saying that Leon's own beloved was kidnapped by a vampire.
Yeah, but when it comes to that's the reason why I associate him with wrath, because a lot of people assume wrath as just outright anger. But look at, say, Wrath, aka Fuhrer Bradley in Full Metal Alchemist. He is far from a berserker.
If we look at some of the definitions as per any dictionary, and I'm pulling up multiple. Strong vengeful anger or indignation. Retributory punishment for an offense or a crime.
Yeah.
Or even better, divine chastisement.
Yeah, these villains born of tragedy like that are seeking some sort of recompense, revenge, or anger at God for doing it.
Yeah. Or vindictive anger.
Yeah, there you go.
Stern indignation. Vengeance. Retribution. There's this is, when you look at any and all definitions of wrath, it's synonymous with anger or rage, but the actual definitions show that there's a very big purpose to the wrath.
Yeah.
That you could say that nearly all vengeful characters were wrathful. Anybody who had a desire for vengeance could be seen as having wrath, because it's all about the indignation you have felt at the wrong done against you and the vehemence with which you follow it, even if that vehemence is cold. Again, Fuhrer Bradley.
Now, granted, some might argue the berserker status given how he fights.
But the way he fights is very precise. It's not a berserker's way of fighting.
No,
Super precise.
I'd say it's more of an angel of death.
Yes, it's a battlefield reaper, and it's somebody who has a very cold, analytical mind on the battlefield.
But we talked about the good, the bad, and the mixed things. Then I do see the debate that's happening in the comments. but I do want to talk about cases where the idea was sound, but the execution less so. And as great as a villain as Darth Vader is in the original trilogy, I do think that the plan to get him there was something that could not be done in 3 movies, even if George Lucas was a better writer.
Maybe, but it still was such poor execution that.
And Leviathan, my counter to your that all evil is rooted in fear. Light Yagami, he didn't fear anything. He did evil with the Death Note because it fit his ideals.
Yeah, ideology is a huge part of any aberrant type villain. They think it's good.
There's a reason why we have the adage culturally, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Because
if you excessively try to follow an ideal to its perfect execution, you are inevitably going to leave the bounds of what is acceptable amongst the people. No, he didn't.
That's
you
not
are
the case.
Twisting his word. You are twisting the intent. He did not fear a world where evil reigned. He wanted a world where there was no more trash. He was megalomaniacal. He was arrogant. He
believed that he was creating a new world,
a utopia.
Mm-hmm. And because of that, a lot of his early kills were solely criminals. However, once L entered the picture and started calling out his certitude in his own belief in that ideal world, especially regarding the methods, that was what sparked it on, was in part because he wanted to demonstrate that his ideology was correct.
Right. Even if there's a moral code associated with it, morals can vary wild. I mean, Thanos in the movies is a great example. He had an alleged moral code of his own,
mm-hmm.
to end the suffering of people that were suffering by killing half of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Not the Thanos from the comics, by the way. That's an entirely different villain.
No, Thanos in the comics was just horny.
Yeah, Thanos in the comics just wanted to kill in the most interesting ways possible to try and attract the gaze of his lady love, Lady Death, who only has eyes for Deadpool.
Yes, that was one of the most comedic things in the entire thing. She legitimately appeared to have eyes for Deadpool, the most insufferable character in the setting.
It's because he's the only one that can never leave her or that can never be with her permanently, I guess. Plus, he kills, in the most fun ways to her.
Yeah.
I gotta run, good brothers. Thank you.
All right, Jeremy. Stay frosty. But I suppose another the big reason why I say that, getting back to Anakin Skywalker, why I say that that his shift needed far more time than 3 movies could have allowed, is it's not a shift to that kind of evil is not something that just happens overnight. It is a gradual affair.
Not only is it a gradual affair, it's an affair that would have been so... Like, for it to be so all-consuming, there would have needed to be way more experiences throughout there to make him just so depraved.
And truth be told, the Clone Wars TV series did more to assist that.
I remember watching it, but I actually don't remember the content, unfortunately.
The the thing with how he was portrayed in the Clone Wars was as a charismatic but rebellious Jedi leader. Because obviously with the Clone Wars, the Jedi had to act as generals and leaders of the clone army.
Mm-hmm.
And his the whole thing with him was the fact that he had that level of charisma to the point where he was willing to bend the rules in order to get things done the way it should have. And of course, his relationship with his apprentice Ahsoka and even his master Obi-Wan in that regard furthered that. But because of that reputation of doing what's needed to in order to get the job done, that is the thing that can open the door to crossing the line.
Yeah, also, his vendetta with what was her name, Ventress?
He didn't have that much of a vendetta against Ventress. I'd say he had a far more personal relation. That kind of vendetta is more towards Dooku.
Dooku, yeah.
Which is understandable when he cuts your hand off.
I shouldn't laugh at that, but they did do it.
Dan Vince asked if we discussed Char Aznable. We technically did discuss Char Aznable in the early days of GeekWatch when we did a compare and contrast between him and Zex Marquise.
Oh yeah, Milliardo Hell Lord, I believe.
Yeah.
Milliardo Peacecraft.
Mm-hmm. Which I would actually say he considers himself Zex Marquise more than he does Milliardo Peacecraft.
Kind of like Hiro Yui considers himself Gundam more than he does Hiro Yui.
Yes.
And Stefan FCA does consider himself literally Gundam more than himself.
Yeah. But with Char Aznable, Char Aznable in his arc, especially in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, is not too far removed from a Hamlet-style villain. The prodigal son coming back to exact his vengeance on the zombie family.
I still like how Dagwin Zabi tries to warn Giran not to become Hitler. Remember that scene?
Yeah.
Where he tells Giran about how back in the old days of Earth there was a ruler who was trying to do what Giran said, named Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
He forgets to tell him, by the way, that guy lost.
Well, the funny thing about that is some of the same excesses that Nazi Germany had with their armaments. Zeon had just as much. Chief among them being a belief in wonder weapons.
I mean, it's very clear the Principality of Zeon was meant to be Nazi Germany as an XB.
Yeah. And of course, chief among them of the wonder weapons is stuff like the Big Zom, which is one of those things that is going to look impressive on paper, but putting it in an actual battlefield would not last.
The Grips 2 Colony Laser. But that's Neo Zeon, and that's also off the rails. Let's go back to Char.
Yeah. The thing about Char Aznable is you have a lot of the same characteristics we've talked about with somebody like Anakin. Charismatic, willing to bend the rules, is able to grant himself a special status because of his exploits. However, I'd say he was the victim of questionable writing, because consider how he acts after the events of Mobile Suit Gundam. Specifically, how he he seems to have shifted his attitude in Zeta Gundam, and then only to shift all the way back in Char's counterattack.
Char's counterattack is a little different than what he felt with Mobile Suit Gundam. In Mobile Suit Gundam, it was him trying to right the wrongs of the Zeon or of the Zabi family against the Zeon family.
Mm-hmm.
And once that was done, he didn't really know what else to do. And so he wanted to see the other side of things for a bit, which is why he became Quattro Vagina.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, everybody, his name is Four Vaginas. And saw things from the other side and saw that both sides were corrupt. He saw that Zeon was corrupt. He saw that the Earth Federation was corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And the place that he saw hope was among the young. Amuro, Camille, all the people he had interacted with among the young were the people who had principles that might be able to pull the world forward. Which is why what happened with Quest during Double Zeta and the constant badgering of Neo Zeon is what pulled Char onto their side, because he felt it was his responsibility at that point.
There's a small part of me that wonders what his attitude would have been if he made even a brief appearance during the events of Operation Stardust.
Mm-hmm.
Because from what I recall with Stardust Memory, he's not mentioned once.
He isn't, because that's Ana Delgado and his whole side spiel.
Yeah, but specifically the idea of utilizing a nuclear armed Gundam like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that he should have shown up in some sort of big ass cameo that would have taken away from the story of Operation Stardust, but at least some sort of mention. But it is interesting you bring up the young in that regard, because there's one scene that has been used as a meme for years now, but when you actually look back at the scene, there's a whole lot more to it. The whole "I came to laugh at you."
Mm-hmm.
And in the actual anime, it's more he is looking at the man who repeatedly kicked his ass in Amuro Ray, looking like a shell of the person who fought him during the 1 year war.
Mm.
And to him, obviously that's comical that somebody who was able to best one of the finest soldiers of Zeon was just moping about the way that he was.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd honestly say that Char Aznable would fall into the realm of an anti-villain than a full-on villain.
I think that's probably true, at least for a majority of his time on screen. The only time he becomes a true villain is when he plans on dropping Axis filled with nukes on the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, i.e. What was that, JT? Yes, I guess he's speaking in tongues again.
He does that. Don't worry about him. He's fine.
Yeah. But I do the thing about some. I'm trying to think of what would be a good example of somebody who we see a gradual descent into becoming a villain. Essentially, somebody who did what was supposed to be done with Anakin but failed.
Graduous villainous descent.
Mm-hmm.
Is.
It's certainly not easy because the if it was that easy, we'd see more examples.
I would say Luke from the Suikoden games. His progression through Suikoden 1, 2, and 3, finally into a villain in Suikoden 3, is pretty pronounced.
I could see that. Although there is one. Actually, the more that I think about it, perhaps several of the characters in both these Souls games and just the bulk of Miyazaki's work could qualify in one form or another.
I mean, Miyazaki tends to do that with the characters, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Some cases are more direct than others. I'd say with a lot of the cases, it's more about people. I'd say throughout these Souls games, through Elden Ring, and even through Sekiro, you have someone who's trying to hold on to some sort of status quo as it's spiraling out around them. And I'd say in say the original Dark Souls, you have this kind of thing, obviously, with Gwyn. I can't comment too much on Dark Souls 2 because even though I played it quite a bit, I never finished it. And Dark Souls 2 is a can of worms into itself when it came to the background of it. And 3 is kind of going back right to that theme of a status quo that is stretched beyond the point where it should have moved on. But in the case,
I've
go ahead.
got a good example of a villain who became a villain gradually.
A hero gradually becoming a villain.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Show Tucker. I'm not wrong.
No, because he was a renowned state alchemist, and he slowly went insane until eventually he did what he did to Nina. Wasn't her name?
Yeah, Nina, his daughter, and to his wife.
And
oh, that's right. I forgot that he also experimented on his wife. You're right.
His wife was the first experiment that was what got him his state alchemist certification. And the second,
he was desperate. That's why he did it.
And all of the attempts to do so without using people ended up in failure.
Yep.
Until in his desperation, because let's not forget he was up against a deadline.
Yep, he had to prove that he could create another chimera like the first one, or lose his state certification, which would make him lose all his funding, which would make him destitute again. Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those cases where the fear of something creates that descent.
Yes, this is a case where fear did cause evil.
Mm-hmm. Although whenever I think, would it surprise you at all if I say that my favorite villain, even if only for a brief amount of time, in Full Metal Alchemist is Sulf Kimbley?
Sulf is
I legitimately enjoy Kimbley as a character.
Kimbley's fantastic, especially considering most of his shit is just because he wants to blow people up.
Yep. Well, especially once he starts developing that weird sense of loyalty toward the brothers, and he just starts helping them because he finds them entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
I've always found that fascinating. I'm like, wait, what's going on here?
And that's backhanded help, too. I mean, that's just him helping them so that he can cause them more trouble later.
That's exactly it, right?
There's also the fact that Kimbley has the only loyalty that he has is whoever allows him to to create the symphony that gives him so much pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Accurate.
he talks at length about how the sound of the screams of his victims gives a pleasurable response to him, and the way he talks about it, it almost sounds like he gets off on people exploding.
He might
does.
be that much of a sadist. He might.
He does. I believe that's established, if not overtly, then through subtext in the manga.
Yeah, but even with that, there is still a method to his madness, but there's certainly a lot of madness, because when Ed calls him out as being insane, the idea of having all of that be summarized as insanity is laughable to him.
He's slightly offended, even.
he more or less is, and he calls that out, as well as more importantly, he pretty much dresses down the Elric brothers on the fact that they would be willing to that they want to get their bodies back, but they're not willing to do what he feels is necessary to do it. Not i.e. that their own, in his mind, their own morality holds them back from their own goals.
Yep. As Porkchop actually just pointed out, Kimberly is only controlled because he needs constraint to give a canvas for him to paint on instead of throwing paint on the floor.
Pretty much.
He only controls himself insofar as it serves his purposes.
Well,
that's exactly it.
I'm pretty sure he went through a psych evaluation when he joined the Amestris military, and I think it's implied that he knew how to hide his tendencies so that they couldn't spot it, which is fairly par for the course for psychopaths and sociopaths.
Yeah, I was going to point out that Kimberly is a textbook sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
The man is absolutely sociopathic in the end, and he's a really intelligent sociopath. Which, funny enough, lack of empathy tends to increase logical thinking, and so people who are sociopathic tend to be somewhat more intelligent than average.
To a point where he, in his dying moments, he uses his dying moments to take revenge at the that one homunculus. I can't remember his name.
Pride,
thank you. The kid. That's the kid, right?
Yeah, and well, the funny thing, I'd hesitate to call that revenge. It's more of him chastising Pride, because the moment that Pride felt that he was on the losing end, he was going to do another body jump. Basically, even in his dying moments, he viewed what Pride was doing as nothing but absolute hypocrisy, and
he viewed what Pride was doing as foolish and completely like you said, hypocritical to what Pride had espoused, and basically just called him a moron for doing it. Mm-hmm. He's like, you're not smart enough to get out of this without pulling one of your little tricks? Dumbass.
Especially since Pride was the one who would speak at length about the superiority of the homunculi. And yet he has to rely on a physical body in order to do that.
Yep.
And I think his attitude is, even if he is a mass murdering psychopath, he is his whole being is consistent.
I may kill lots of people, but at least I'm consistent.
More or less.
I can only imagine Pride would probably seem like even larger hypocrite to him, because that body's fueled by the very humans he speaks ill of.
Which is why I think it would have been interesting I'm pretty sure Beyond the Grave he was laughing at Father.
I'm pretty sure from Beyond the Grave, Kimberly was laughing at everybody.
Yeah, more than likely, that's Kimberly.
He's like, I did everything I wanted. You fuckers couldn't catch me, and I killed myself and did that in the way I wanted to. You all fuckers failed.
But
It didn't matter that he's dead. To him, they would have all failed.
Yeah, but I especially highlight Father because of, well, the way he went out.
Dude, Father got absolutely wrecked.
And the thing is about truth. Truth is only telling you the things that you already know, but don't want to admit.
Yup.
Man, I would have a very good conversation with Truth.
But
And truth is kind of creepy, just from my perspective.
I think he's meant to be. The way that Truth portrays himself is not too far removed from not a cosmic horror, but certainly a cosmic entity.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're correct there.
The more esoteric. I know when I say that, people think of Cthulhu or the like, but I'm thinking more of the older ends of the mythos, who are harder to pin down into a specific shape.
Something like Yog Shoggoth or whatever?
I'd actually say Truth would have more in common with the Yellow King.
Oh, okay.
Haster.
Okay, fair.
I was going to say Haster is probably a very good comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I pronounced it wrong then. I always said Hoster.
Well, I think the whole point is that there's that the names aren't supposed to be able to be pronounced in human languages.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
I think both are correct, because I have heard it both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fair enough.
But when it comes to villains that may have had a fascinating concept but didn't quite hit the mark, I'm pretty sure we can think of a few. But if you guys have any suggestions on that one, I'd like to impose a little bit of a hard mode. No MCU villains. Especially no MCU villains past Phase 3.
I wasn't even going to bother with the MCU.
The villain from Xenosaga, Kevin or whatever the heck his name was.
When I think of a villain from Xenosaga, the big one that comes to mind is Albedo.
Man, Albedo's another one that kind of fell short. Like, the villains in those games were kind of disappointing as a whole.
Can I name a stereotypical one?
Go ahead.
You, Yevon.
Oh, you son of a bitch! You had to remind me that thing exists, didn't you?
I mean, I could have gone further and said Necron from 9.
God has punished me for my hubris, and my work is never finished.
Except this time I'm doing the good work.
But yeah, in both cases, I'd say between the two of them, Necron is a much bigger offender than you, Yevon, is. At least with you, Yevon, you have a significant amount of build-up.
Especially once you get to Unalesca.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because she all but tells you about Yevon.
Mm-hmm. But even then, Yevon as a villain was a good idea. The execution at the end was terrible.
Especially even more so if you were a completionist and tried to get every single Aeon.
You mean did get every single Aeon?
No, tried. I had all of them.
Yeah. Hi, me.
Yeah, I'm also the asshole who figured out the strategy of, what was it, double damage, triple AP, and then you'd get your characters to have 10,000 needles used on them. That was a thing.
But when it comes to Necrom in FF9, the closest thing that you have to any sort of build up to him is Sid's wife talking about how Kuja was using the Alexandria War for some bigger purpose. And that bigger purpose is more of the plan of Garland than it is of this Necrom. And whenever I brought this up, some people would bring up, then what about Chaos in the original? That's a stretch, and that is a stretch beyond stretches, because first off, it's not exactly fair to bring up the first attempt. Second off,
I think it was lampshaded brilliantly.
It was lampshaded the moment you killed Garland.
Mm-hmm.
With him summoning the fiends.
Garland will knock you all down. My favorite line of his.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that Shades ended up using Sephiroth for the graphic, but if I'm being honest, I do consider Sephiroth's villainy in the original story of 7 to be significantly overstated.
Well, that's because his villainy, really, if you look at what his villainy actually was, it amounts to killing some members of Shinra, burning down Nibelheim, and then dying.
Yeah, and most of his quote-unquote villainy was actually done by Sephiroth clones.
And by Genova.
Yes, Genova as well.
A stronger argument can be made that the true villain in 7 was Hojo.
Yes.
Yes.
As tempting as it would be to say Genova is what a lot of people think of a cosmic horror.
Well, Genova's a force of nature, to call it something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in the age-old man versus blank conflict scaling that you would use in telling stories, Genova is definitely man versus extraterritorial nature, whereas Hojo is man versus the evils of man.
And
to the point where he's the reason...
Also, I'd like to point out that Hojo is a poster child for how excesses are evil and not fear.
Accurate?
Excesses being the source of evil.
In his case, it's more the difference between both Hojo and Gast. We're both trying to pursue knowledge of the past. The difference between them is Gast had a moral center and Hojo didn't.
I'd like to point out the characterization of Hojo in 7 and in 7 Remake is still basically the same. It is a man who has disregard for everything but his science.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't care if he's threatened. He doesn't care if people stand in his way. He'll cut them down. He'll move them aside, and he'll continue his pursuit. The only thing he cares about is the science. And while that is admirable, it's a depraved sort of admirable.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a...
Brian is asking if Odium from the Stormlight Archives would count. I'm not comfortable saying that regarding a story that has not completed.
Yeah.
Ask me again in a few years. I will note that I do love the portrayal of Odium, especially with the way he acts as the kind old man sort of devil. But I might be biased because of my time listening to the graphic audio version of the Stormlight Archive. But it's really hard for me to say too much on Odium at this time. And I'd say, but if I may be a bit brazen, I honestly think that Ultimecia played a bigger role as a villain in 8 than Genova did in 7, or even Sephiroth did in 7.
Well, Ultimecia, you're sort of... you're not told it's her right away, but you know that a sorceress has possessed, what do they call her, matron? Idea? Something like that?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Adia gets possessed because she herself was a sorceress. Yes. See, I can't remark well on that one, Monk, because it's very, as I've discussed before regarding FF8, it's very clear that the discussion, the storylines following Alone, following the present, and following Ultimecia were three separate stories that were attempted to be cobbled together as one.
Yeah.
I am inclined to agree with that, and I think we got essentially 2 games worth of content in a single game.
Which is pretty nice. I just wish they could have... I wish that there had been a little more time to polish the writing, so that way the melding of these 3 different story tracks could have been more cohesive and wouldn't have felt as disjointed as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Could have, yeah, I would, yeah.
But as for Ultimecia in the grander scheme of things being a villain, I don't think we can really say that.
The main reason that I say that is due to her taking far more direct action through, even if it is through possession. Because Adia was not the only sorceress that she possessed during that story. There was also Adele.
Yes,
and Renoa.
Mm-hmm.
And Renoa.
And Alone, which is how you achieve time compression in the first place.
Yeah.
By the way, time compression that was a fucking stupid goddamn concept, but goddamn. Ultimecia always felt more like a force of nature than anything. I don't think that you could really classify her as a villain in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because even though she took direct action, it always felt like an action you could never actually respond to. No matter what that action from the future was, you weren't responding to Ultimecia, you were responding to its results.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that you can't respond to a tornado, you respond to its results.
Yeah.
She always felt like a force of nature because of that.
And to be fair, a lot of villains in Final Fantasy have felt like forces of nature. I know it's tempting to say that that's par for the course because of the whole "let's kill God with the power of friendship" meme that people have taken unironically. But that isn't.
So,
but the level of applicability with that is not as clear cut as people think. Yes, you have chaos, but then in 2 you had the Emperor, who
you absolutely could work against, even when he took over both heaven and hell.
Yeah.
He was actually a fairly compelling villain, the Emperor, I mean.
He was. Emperor Mateus is a very nice villain.
Yeah.
If we look at 4, Golbez was absolutely the villain.
Yes.
Even if Zeromus/Zemus is in the end the driving force behind him, Golbez was the villain, plain and simple.
Well, it's just one of those things. Like, we don't learn about Zemus until Golbez essentially is depossessed. So, that's exactly it. For all intents and purposes, Golbez is our antagonist villain the entire game.
Mm-hmm. And we do respond to him directly quite a bit.
Exactly.
What I think is especially telling is that by the time you meet Golbez, you've already forsaken the Dark Sword and become a paladin.
Yep.
I think that's actually the best thing too, because it's very clear that Golbez was manipulating Baron to try and turn his little brother into another him, another person who follows the path of darkness and uses that dark power for his own benefit.
And the legacy of his father essentially leads him astray from that plan.
And probably would have succeeded if it wasn't for both Rosa and Rydia.
Yep, Rosa and Rydia were the 2 guiding lights in his life that caused him to feel bad for the things he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Rosa gave him all the doubts that he needed, and the results of what happened to the village of Mist after killing the Mist Dragon, and Well, kill a summon, you kill the summoner, apparently.
But there was also
Bomb ring.
yeah, the bomb ring that he was given after he was stripped of his command of the Red Wings.
Mm-hmm. It caused him to seek redemption,
Mm-hmm.
and he sought redemption, and found it at the foot of his father,
Yeah.
his dead father.
In the case of 3, you definitely have the force of nature thing with the cloud of darkness, because 3 was trying to be a successor to the original.
Yep.
5, you have X-Death. X-Death is definitely one that is more hands-on.
Dexter, legitimately, he delighted in killing Galoof.
He's a tree.
Mm-hmm.
X-Death is a tree.
A
Everybody
very
remember,
angry
X-Death
tree.
is a tree.
Yeah.
X-Death is a tree that hates turtles.
Mm-hmm.
No, Monk, you should know that joke from when he does his EX burst in Dissidia, where sometimes he'll just say "turtle" for
Yeah.
no reason.
And of course, in Dissidia, he is the most chill of the villains, because in his mindset, everything's going to be consumed by the void eventually. So why should he rush it?
Yeah, him and Cloud of Darkness are the most laid back because of that.
Yeah.
They're both part of the void, so they both don't need to fucking care.
And of course, with 6, there's not much that I need to say regarding Kefka in terms of being an active villain.
There you go. My imitation of the SNES sounds for his laugh.
I already mentioned 7 and 8. 9, the driving force
Kuja.
is Kuja.
Yep.
There's literally nothing to say there, but Kuja,
Mm-hmm.
10,
With Seymour.
and Sin. Although Sin is again more man versus nature.
Especially since the way that Sin's attacks are portrayed is not far removed from a honest to god hurricane.
Yep.
Especially given the fact that a lot of the way that Spira is portrayed was inspired by the Philippine Islands.
Yep.
I'm also reminded of, when you talk about Sin, I'm reminded of, I think it was called the Juggernaut from Legend of Legaia.
It's been a while since Legend of Legaia, so I will take your word for it.
That is a deep cut right there. I remember playing Legend of the Guy.
I'm going to abstain on 11 because I don't consider myself enough of an expert when it comes to 11's story.
No, Monk. You want to know who the villain of FF11 is?
Who?
Square.
Yep. I do agree.
We beat your unbeatable super boss using exploits you weren't supposed to. Banned.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I can't. I will not defend the whole Pandemonium Warden thing. There's a reason why. There's a reason why less people are doing the sandbox style of MMO, and instead are going for the more theme park style, which is for the best because.
No, Ashes of Creation is looking pretty good there. It's a combination between the two.
Oh, it'll certainly be the best. It'll certainly be good. The only other major sandbox MMO these days is Eve, and as I mentioned to you in the past, Eve is having troubles these days.
Eve has troubles all the time because people don't know how to spend their fucking ISK, I mean.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I know that Mandalore tried to play devil's advocate about it, but I was against skill injections from day one.
Mm-hmm.
His argument at the time was that there's always been a character market, which is true, but having the skills doesn't mean you know how to use them.
Also true, but that doesn't excuse it.
No, his argument was that you can have a big expensive ship and still get your ass kicked by a little ship that knows what they're doing.
Though it's not very likely.
Yeah, the problem is people who know what they're doing are going to know how to exploit the skill injections.
Yep.
So you end up right back at square one. But I may I do have, if I can find a proper video series, I may revisit the stories of 11 and its expansions. I do know that of the ones, Chains of Promathia is the one that people talk the highest of, especially when it comes to having a story with a villain. But with 12, it could be
it's the entire empire.
It is the entire empire, and to a lesser extent, it is the Acuria. But I'd say the. Hang on, I'm trying to recall.
I think the two that would have been the biggest villains would have been Vayne and Sidolphus.
Yeah, and between the two, I'd say Vayne is an antagonist more than he is a villain.
All right.
Especially since given the agenda that he has about cutting off the servitude of man and trying to essentially get the gods out of the way. But also the speech that he gives when he's getting booed by the Dalmascans. And when it comes to 13, I'd say you can pretty much put the entirety of the Fal'Cie. You didn't really have, but even then, those were the Fal'Cie are literal forces of nature.
Yep.
And it's Orphan may be the final boss, but it is just a representation of the collective desire for Ragnarok between all of them. 13-2, obviously it was very clearly Caius, who, if you get the true ending, mocks you for thinking that you were going to get a happy ending, which I will always have a soft spot for. That, and the way Caius carries himself is like a fucking boss.
Like a boss. Yep.
Like a boss.
And when it comes to 14, I suppose once again the villain is a whole empire rather than one person. Although Gaius Van Baelzar does make a strong case in the original story.
I do like Gaius Van Baelzar. His entire cast of characters retain his side because the Rogadin doesn't really get much exposure. You just kind of exposed to him, and then you fight him and win. It's kind of disappointing. But the other one, the lady, Lydia or whatever,
yeah,
she was crazy, and you get a lot of build up to the fight with her.
Yeah. I have heard good things about Nail Van Darnus from the pre-A Realm Reborn days, but I'm not going to speak too much on that. But even then, on both cases, they're representations of the Empire and the Empire's goals.
Nero Skolteva is another one too. He was an interesting character.
And with 15, you have a active if you do have the enemy of an empire once again,
but real. Go ahead.
The real villain is Ardain.
Yep.
And
Ardain.
You know how we talked about the hero becoming a villain? I'd say Ardain is one of the better examples, because he probably would have been the hero if Bahamut wasn't a fucking dick.
Okay. So we have to specify there, Monk. If Bahamut wasn't being a dick in the novel that is not canon.
For some reason.
Well, no, the novel's not canon because it wasn't written by the writer. In the novel, for those of you who are unaware, Bahamut was actually looking to use the power of the Darkness Blight to scour the entire planet clean eventually. If we go by what is just presented in the game and in the episodes, especially episode Arden became a villain because he was betrayed.
Yeah. And he was betrayed by the gods, but more specifically rejected by Bahamut.
But he was rejected by Bahamut for a reason that was sound.
Mm-hmm.
Being that he was, I guess the best word is, he was infected.
Since do you mind? Since you didn't have the chance to be the evangelist earlier with what was mentioned, I think this is a good opportunity for that, as far as why Arden can count as the hero turned villain.
All right, yeah, I can definitely do that. So in the story of episode Arden and what is put into more detail within the non-canonical novel, Arden was one of the two princes of the kingdom that is now Insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
He was another Lucis, and he had a very unique ability to save people from the Star Scourge plague. Because this was back when it first appeared.
Mm-hmm.
And Arden could take the plague into his body out of those people. Which, as I'm sure everyone else is thinking, that doesn't sound like a good thing, because it's not. Arden did this because he loved his people. He wanted to help them. He wanted to save them. Arden was legitimately a good guy. He was also in love with the woman who became the first priestess, like Luna Freya is, the first oracle. And he was also going to be in line for the throne. That was the biggest thing. But because he had been saving the people for so long, his own body was filled with the plague of the Star Scourge. And because of that, when he went to the succession ceremony in order to be ordained as the next king of Lucis by Bahamut, Bahamut said that his soul was too unclean and he could no longer be king. It's at this time that his brother Somnus shows up, thinks that Arden is going to betray them, essentially, and instead fights him and, well, kills him. And also kind of makes it look like there's something between him and the first Oracle, which there was nothing. Or at least that's how it looks like to Arden.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, Arden feels betrayed, but because he's been infected with the Star Scourge, his body cannot dissolve and re-enter. I think it was re-enter the light of the planet, something along those lines. And he instead is sealed.
Mm-hmm.
And because he is sealed, there's a chance for him to eventually be awoken, and he is awoken by the Empire. And also given the Infernian, one of the 6 astrals, as essentially an energy source, which causes the corruption of Ifrit.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why Ifrit is the only summon you can ever get in the game. And with this, Arden has decided that the entire Lucis line, it doesn't matter that they're descendants of his, and the entire world, in fact, should succumb to the same darkness he was forced to be a part of. and that it would be his final gift to the world, I guess, is the best way to put it, before the world itself ended. So very much a descent into madness and evil because of a betrayal.
Something utterly beyond his control. Unfortunate.
I mean, that's generally how betrayal works.
No, I just mean like his situation is just unfortunate. I guess I haven't played 15, so yeah.
And honestly, it was a very compelling story. It was one of the few times where I felt that they had exacted, well, your villain is also a someone sympathetic too, in a way that didn't feel ham-fisted.
Which I think this is as good a time as any to talk about that. One of the things that I knew I wanted to get into is certain narratives and certain falsehoods that have been spread regarding villains and how to write them. And chief among them is this line that is innocent on its own, but has created a narrative that goes far beyond it, especially by certain bad actors. That being, the villain is the hero of his own story.
Now, the way that's meant to be interpreted, at least the way I've seen it as it should be interpreted, is that villains do not think that what they are doing is wrong. Now, that's the only thing that should tell you. But there have been times where I have seen people, especially all those writers who want to, quote, subvert expectations, end quote, use this as a club to say, oh no, your villain needs to be relatable and sympathetic and have something tragic, and that's why they're evil. Instead of just letting evil be evil.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan Vince mentions Kefka. And if you look at Kefka's story, there absolutely is a tragic element to it. Him having been one of the experimental victims, I guess is the best word, of the Gestalian Empire's Magitech
Esper program.
Yeah, the Magitech experiments. But that's not the reason for his villainy. Not at all.
He's villainous because he's evil.
Yes, and it's never stated anywhere that he changed after the experimentation, or that he grew colder, or anything of that nature. It's absolutely shown that Kefka's just Kefka.
Yep. Well, one of the most iconic moments for him was the poisoning of Doma.
Yeah. The poisoning of Doma was, frankly, traumatizing to 6-year-old me. I was like, how can someone poison an entire castle of people and be fine with it? Showing that I was not a sociopath, apparently. But the Kefka is absolutely one of those villains who is villainous and nothing else more. He doesn't need to be anything else more.
What comes to mind is something that we said during the Parliament episode on Cyberpunk Edge Runners, specifically about Adam Smasher, because I had mentioned at the time that people had raised the question of how is it that Adam was able to go through a full cyborg conversion and not go cyber psycho with that much chrome. And
he wasn't sane to begin with.
Yeah, the line I think I used was, he never went cyber psycho because he was already a regular psycho.
He was already well beyond the mentality of humanity. He had nothing to lose in the first place.
Yeah.
Which is the implication behind cyberpsychosis. We don't know exactly what Kefka was like prior to whatever experimentation would have been done on him. But the implication you get from anyone who interacts with him that has known him, including Edgar when you first get to Figaro Castle, throughout the game, is he's always been this way.
He's been a lunatic his entire life.
Yeah, he's always been some crazy motherfucker working for the for the damn Gestalian Empire, and so nobody likes dealing with him. Like he has a reputation amongst other statesmen and rulers of other places.
Yeah, and when it comes to now, obviously there are the reason why I have my issues with the whole thing of the hero of their own story is I cross the line, or I say I draw the line when people use that line as the impetus to say that a villain is unironically the hero. And there is one good example that I've seen for years. People abuse in this way in Marvel Comics.
Oh, jeez.
Eric Lancashire, aka Magneto.
Magneto.
But like he's an exception rather than the rule, though.
Here's the. He obviously had his experiences as a Holocaust survivor, and later on, as a mutant who had to deal with discrimination for that. However, the key thing that the good uses of Magneto try to hammer home that a lot of people seem to forget is even if he has a decent cause, his methods are anything but.
Once again referring to the road to hell being paved with good intentions.
Well, do you remember the brief stint that they did with Magneto as an X-Men?
Yeah, I do remember that, and the idea of him having to try and carry on his best friend's legacy, even if it wasn't one that he fully agreed with. I do think that was an interesting story, but it's important. It's important to remember. There had been this narrative for years that the inspiration for Professor X and Magneto was Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Some recent remarks have cast some doubt into that, but I can't deny that they do make good parallels to each other.
It's a good comparison, even if that's not actually the inspiration.
It may have not been the inspiration, but it certainly can fit.
Mm-hmm. Which is a good thing about versatile characters. They can fit a lot of different things.
Yeah. I know that might sound a bit contradictory, given how a few weeks ago we did an entire episode talking about how dumb the Superman as Jesus thing is, but the thing is, that is a bad example of an allegory.
Mm-hmm. Whereas the X-Men comic book series has always been an allegory for, well, any of those social movements where you've got an underclass against the ruling class.
Yeah, I know. Obviously, given the time frame that it was made, the civil rights movement is the easy one to go with.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that it has to be limited to that.
Yeah, I mean, I believe Bryan Singer said when he did the X-Men movies, his was explicitly about homosexuality.
Which at that time is certainly apropos, and that's also given the thing I mentioned about the methods being the problem, consider what he did in the first X-Men movie.
Mm-hmm.
His whole plan was to utilize a machine that forces mutation, but as was revealed, even though the mutation puts the people involved with it on a ticking time clock that will kill them, he doesn't care.
Yep. so long as he can get the world to accept that mutants are a thing.
Mm-hmm.
To him, the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
And that's why he's a good villain.
Mm-hmm.
He apparently learned from his time as a Holocaust victim exactly how to be a Nazi.
And there is...
I'm not joking!
Yeah.
God damn it, he's right.
I think... I do have... I will note that I saw a lot more of this concept of Magneto was the hero, especially in the aftermath of First Class.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually say First Class is a good example of that descent, because at the same time you have Charles Xavier being far more of an idealist.
Mm-hmm.
in regards to that method. Whereas by the time that they've met, Eric is more consumed with his desire for vengeance.
Yep. I think the most telling thing about Eric's descent in First Class is he eventually comes to a point where he just doesn't think that Charles' methods will ever actually work.
Or rather, that he's already decided that they won't work without even humoring the idea.
It wasn't even that they will not work. He wouldn't even entertain the idea that they could work. To him, it was an impossibility.
Remember, he said peace was never an option.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, true.
But in a lot of cases,
was that Fassbender, the guy playing Magneto?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought so. I wasn't sure of that.
And some of that unironic interpretation I do attribute to Fassbender's charisma as an actor.
Yeah, he did very well.
He's just a good actor in general, in my opinion.
Yeah. But the whole, I'd say a recent victim of the whole hero of their own story is how Loki has been treated over the last few years.
In
They
the MCU?
really ruined him as a character, in my opinion.
I will admit that when we did the tail end of our Captain Marvel reconstruction, and I've mentioned this idea in the past, we put forth an idea to kind of right that ship. That being a series that we would have planned called My Name is Loki, which we intentionally would have made as a comedy.
I figured based on the name.
Well,
What's really funny is that they then made an actual Loki TV series, Monk.
I do not acknowledge that TV series
It's shit. Don't.
because and since you weren't there for that, the whole idea was after everything that happened in Infinity War and Endgame, Loki's trying to turn a new leaf. The problem is he's not good at it, and
nobody trusts him anyway.
Yeah. And the reason why I went with the title "My Name Is Loki" was because I was ripping off the concept of from the show My Name Is Earl.
My name is Earl. Yeah, I figured.
Because when he's trying to turn a new leaf, everybody thinks that it's part of some master plan or some half-baked scheme. And either one of two things happen: either people don't trust him, or they take a chance, but something goes wrong because, well, this is a sitcom. That's kind of what you have to do.
And then they have to blame it on Loki because he's the only one who could have made it go wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was a funny little idea we had to try and.
That would have been preferable to what they did to his character with the show.
Yeah.
The show, other than I got the summary of the very first episode and went, "This is stupid. This time travel bullshit is stupid. Why are they doing this?" If
I'm being honest, with some rare exception, I'm not a big fan of time traveler dimension hopping in most stories, and especially in comic books. Time travel, I'm willing to be a bit. I'm willing to be a little bit more tolerant towards. I am less tolerant towards a multiverse. For many of the same reasons that Eric July is against multiverses.
I don't mind multiverses, but I find it as a tool to write yourself out of a corner lazy.
If your setting is designed to be a multiverse, I'm fine with it. If it's not, then yeah, it's definitely feels like a tool that you made to write yourself out of a corner.
And I will admit that there are certain exceptions to the rule. I've made clear the deep amount of love I have for Chrono Cross, which, even though it's only using 2 universes, is still kind of a multiverse. And I know some people would say that the villain of Chrono Cross is Lynx. Not really. The bigger villain is Fate, as in the supercomputer.
Yeah.
Although
Lynx is more or less your antagonist.
he is for the first half of things, but a lot of the stuff that he was doing is tied to the plans that Fate had.
What's really funny is that naming that supercomputer Fate kind of is a self-fulfilling name.
Yeah, but the other. I know that a lot of people have made the joke about Griffith doing nothing wrong.
I hate those people, and those people should feel bad, and they should probably go away forever.
But
Yes.
I think a lot of the people who I'm always trying to figure out how many people are doing that who already know and are just fucking around, and how many people don't know better when it comes to the story of Berserk.
Even if the people who know are just fucking around, I still loathe them.
Yeah, Griffith did everything wrong.
The man decided to betray comrades of blood and sweat and arms for his own personal gain. That is evil on a scale that is actually personal to me. People may say, what do you consider worse in life? Death? Rape? And I always tell them, betrayal.
There is a reason why the lowest circle of hell is for traitors.
Traitors and people who talk at the movies.
No, the people who talk at the movie get the special hell.
Yeah, the special hell where they have to watch grandmas talk about their Florida vacation on a slide deck. On an old-fashioned 70s slide machine.
That is vile, sir.
Oh my god.
Once again, the special hell. I suppose I can get away with saying it in that tone because because I'm the closest thing to someone of the cloth in this call.
Oh, jeez.
I mean,
I believe it or not, I almost went to seminary. I chose not to in the end, but I almost did.
I guess you avoided a fate worse than hell then.
Mm-hmm. But whenever you do that whole thing of unironically claiming that the villain did nothing wrong, to me what that's telling is it's exposing the person making that argument as a moral relativist. That if there's the right if it's being done for the right reasons,
there's no wrong action.
Yeah.
Which is not accurate. Like, wrong is wrong, even if you do it for the right reasons.
A few years ago, somebody unironically tried to use the no bad tactics, only bad targets, and I was not in a charitable mood that day, and I ended up getting on him for quite a while about about how do you honestly think you have the brass balls to take that to its logical conclusion?
Because if you justify the bad tactics, justifying any target is fairly easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, extremely.
Even Asmongold, a man who acknowledges himself as an asshole and has said that he's done things that take advantage of other people in his life, mostly back when WoW's auction house and everything was still the Wild West, and he did robber baron tactics in WoW before everything was regulated. He said, "I'm living proof that if you give people the ability to do these things, they will find a way to justify any target." Even Asmongold says this. He doesn't like these bad things, but he sure as fuck will do them if they're open to him, because at this point he's doing it as a way to raise awareness. It's actually pretty cool of him.
Look at Congress and how they line their pockets. If you need more evidence of that,
let's not get into actual politics here. If we can.
No, I know. I just sorry. I thought it had to be.
That's just true in any timeline.
Yep.
But
well, what about the big bad himself, the oldest villain in history, Lucifer himself?
Oh, yeah, fair.
I consider the best portrayal of Lucifer to be in Paradise Lost.
Okay, which version of Paradise Lost? I have to ask because I'm curious.
I'm specifically referring to the original story, the one, but I believe it was Milton.
Okay, so the prose.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of old stories were written in prose, so bringing that up specifically doesn't say much. And hell, most of the Vedas are written in rhyme in Hinduism.
Fair.
But
Hindu rhymes are funny sounding.
Mm-hmm.
No hate to any of my Hindu bros out there.
Look, the Hindu bros who know me know that I pick on everybody. and
continue to say around here, we hold one truth to be self-evident, that all people are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
As it should be.
But the big reason that I bring it up is because it does kind of portray him as a bit of a fallen hero, in the sense that he had what he believed were good intentions for his rebellion, and the thing that broke him was seeing his followers having to suffer because of his own choice. You have a similar thing with Khan.
Yes. Porkchop, it's true that some people need a bigger fire, but all of them burn all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, accurate.
It's equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of resources or outcome.
Human fat rendering is human fat rendering. At the end of the day,
Brother, get the Flammenwerfer, the heavy Flammenwerfer.
It was Flammen.
But the big reason that I do bring up Paradise Lost is because in some of the other stories you do have the interpretation of him. The big reason why Lucifer has a negative view of humanity that he does is
I like how they brought him up in Persona 5. He's literally like the greatest persona you can fuse. Satanael.
Well,
yeah.
In Persona 5, there's a few things to consider. One is the fact that a major theme with Persona 5 is Gnosticism.
And freedom.
Mm-hmm.
He's also the strongest optional boss in what game was that? Digital Devil, Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 2.
Well, Digital Devil Saga it has far more Hindu leanings in its storytelling. But there's always been a theme within the entirety of the Shin Megami Tensei series. There has always been the divide between law and chaos, and I would actually argue it handles the law and chaos concept far better than D&D ever did.
Yeah.
Because both of them are represented by two factions, the Gaia cult and the Messianic cult.
Notice both factions are cults.
Mm-hmm. And granted, you can side with one of them in most of the mainline games, but the quote unquote true ending is rejecting both of them. It is the hardest path because a lot of the good stuff you're only going to get from taking one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But usually the way it goes in those games.
Yeah, the theme is rejecting both extremes, and instead favoring a more human centric path. The big good.
I just thought of a character who sort of goes from the path of sort of hero to villain that was, at least for me, a character I really liked. I was reminded of Albert Simon from, not the actual character Albert Simon, but the one who pretends to be Albert Simon in Kudelka and Shadow Hearts.
It's been I haven't touched either in quite a while, and I mentioned this last week about the fact that I am glad that Shadow Hearts is getting a spiritual successor alongside Wild Arms, but I have a far more emotional connection to Wild Arms than I do to Shadow Hearts.
I love Wild Arms. It's one of my favorite series of all time, and it made me very, very sad that the series just kind of dropped off a cliff eventually.
Well, we're getting Armed Fantasia.
Oh, I don't. Should I be excited or tentative?
Yes, because the gang is back together, and even Michiko Naruke is back.
So we're getting the OG musician.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, I'm tentatively excited then. I hope this is good.
Something that you're gonna get used to around here, Ein, is that while other people who consider themselves gaming or pop culture commentators will talk about how everything sucks and the failures of the week, which I'll certainly cover here and there on my own time. That is not the MO here.
Our ethos is to expand the hobby, whatever hobby it is,
mm-hmm.
and that's why we do things like our discussion about FF16 or the gaming hangover shit shows, which we do.
There's nothing wrong with that. You got to talk about. See, don't get me wrong. I love a good take, like a proper logical takedown of a poorly built game, but more often than not, I'm looking for new things to enjoy. And that's kind of why I like. It's kind of why I ended up like finding Mildred's channel in the first place. Because I was like, I need new things to listen to, and it just fucking. I don't even remember what video I started on, and then it just I just didn't care at that point.
You should hang out with us for more of the shit shows then, because the gaming shit shows are where we point out all the cool shit that people miss watching the big presentations for things like E3, Tokyo Game Show, Game Awards, etc.
Well, I literally messaged Mildred the other night about the Unliving on a game that's popped up on Steam recently, and I was like, "This looks promising." And he was like, "I'm way ahead of you. I already know about this one." And I'm like,
"Yep."
See,
we covered that. We covered that on the last shit show.
Oh, that's funny.
So, So yeah, that's a big thing. If you wanna join us for more of the stuff where we point out the shit other people are missing, just we'll drop you a line.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gladly. Because there's not enough stuff out there that just goes, "Hey, look, here's some more fun stuff that's coming out."
Which is there's the age-old saying about be the change you wish to see, and I've tried to follow that. But getting back on the matter of villains, as I mentioned before, one of the four that's on screen here is Ryubei Sonozaki, the Terror Dopant from Kamen Rider Double. I did needle shades about him picking that one because he's a Double fan just like myself and Zan.
He's a Double fanboy, yeah.
But he had said that there aren't too many compelling villains in Tokusatsu, which there are certainly them, but when it comes to volume, I can kind of understand.
Yeah, I would argue. Who's another one I could argue?
She's not compelling, but she certainly is ridiculous. I'm reminded of the Dragon Princess from Super Inframan.
Oh wow.
Because if he hadn't gone with that, I would have guessed he would have gone with the god complex that is Dan Kuroto.
Dan Kuroto's another really good villain.
But with Dan Kuroto, I've called him the Japanese Gul Dukat because in both cases he overachieved.
Would you believe that I've never seen Kamen Rider?
I can believe that. There aren't a lot of people in the West who watch it because it's hard. It's
hard to
access.
My main familiarity with Tokusatsu is
it's
Ultraman.
It's Ultraman, which we covered in the past, and I've said Ultraman would be easier to adapt into tabletop than Kamen Rider would, which is a position that I maintain.
Hey Monk, I've got another compelling Tokusatsu villain for you, from Kamen Rider even.
You're not going to say Shadow Moon, are you?
I'm going to say Evolto.
Yeah, I can certainly go with Evolto. He is an absolute.
Out of all of Heisei, to me, I think like as much as I love Ryubei Sonozaki and the Terror Dopant, as much as I love the fact that there are many different antagonists in Gaim, as much as I love the Phantoms from Wizard, Evolto's just the best fucking villain. I swear to God.
Some people have made jokes that Evolto is a DBZ villain who found their way into Kamen Rider. I don't quite agree with that because that is only applicable in terms of the amount of forms that he goes through.
Yeah, I'm talking his characterization.
Mm-hmm.
God damn, I love Evolto. He's such a good fucking villain. Him and Sento are like they are the driving force in all of goddamn Build. And I'm sorry, but without either of them, Build would suffer greatly.
Obviously, it would when it comes to Sento because for obvious reasons. But he has even though it takes a while for him to actually reveal himself, his presence is still there from the early days because I remember how in the first few episodes the big mystery was who is Bloodstalk because he kept showing up but you never saw him revert his transformation.
Yep. He never took off his trans steam gun.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed that there were multiple people who could be, especially since they were disguising his voice, or at least the appearance therein.
And I believe that they were mostly hinting at his name was Gentoku, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy who eventually became the crocodile themed one. Yeah.
Rogue.
Yes. He was Blood Rogue at first.
Mm-hmm.
And then he became a good guy eventually. And started saying everything with his really silly ass t-shirts. God, that joke got overplayed, and yet I never felt like it overstayed its welcome.
Well,
But
it's a perfect meme template.
I'm reminded of Evil the Cat from the Earthworm Jim cartoon. Specifically with his overplayed, but it never kind of overstayed its welcome, a minor setback joke. He would screw himself over and you'd get that a minor setback.
Well, Earthworm Jim is a crackfic.
It's certainly ridiculous.
Doug TenNapel is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have his full-on Launch the... was it Launch the Cat? Yes, Launch the Cat was the first book.
Yeah.
I have the specialty box and everything sitting up on my shelf nearby because I got the signed version and everything. Because that man's games and the cartoon were a huge part of my early years.
I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up yelling at the screen at the end of the first game because of the cow.
Yeah, I did. Like, legitimately, when I was a kid, I did. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. You think you're finally getting that happy ending, and then nope. Remember that cow you launched way in the beginning? There's a case of a long, protracted Chekhov's gun.
Yup.
Oh.
But Rails, I think.
Yeah. But when it comes... even with all of the form changes that he goes through, including the whole thing of him possessing both Build and Croz.
Yep.
He always refers to that as phases of his plan.
Yep. He's definitely someone playing Xanatos chess.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Which is why I don't think the DBZ comparison with him really fits.
It doesn't. And why I also think that the name of Sento's ultimate form is actually rather fitting. Like, yeah, he's a genius that made a bunch of stuff, and yeah, he's a genius that helped figure out stuff about the rider system. But what's really genius is playing Xanatos chess with a guy who has played Xanatos chess with multiple planets in one and defeating him.
Mm-hmm.
It's like super genius levels of bullshit.
I do recall that Shades and Company really didn't like the design of Build Genius, but I didn't have that much problem with it.
They didn't like it probably because it's just a bunch of full bottles plugging into a suit and looks kind of funny. But
it fits the all-together tradition that you see with a lot of final forms.
The reason I like it is it feels like like it's trying to be a neural synapse. It looks like a nerve ganglion. Which
wouldn't be the first time that neural networks would appear because of the problem with Black Hazard.
Yeah, I just and yeah, Evolto was just. I loved his presence. I loved his charisma. I loved everything about him. He was just so much fun.
Yeah. If as far as ones that could come close, I'd hesitate to refer to Nobuhiko, aka Shadow Moon, as a villain, if only because of the fact that he's far more of a robotic antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
One that appeared far more than he should have. Then again, people like Black more than they like Black RX for a reason. But yeah, I'd also have to give a honorable mention to Neji Ranger in Mega Ranger.
Yeah.
The only time that the whole Evil Ranger has gone all the way, and that kind of thing, and it hasn't really been done since. So it's a case of the brightest star burns twice as quickly.
Mm.
But I would say that one with a lot of the villains that we've talked about, even the ones that have a tragic background, there isn't an attempt to try and make the villain relatable in that regard. Which, honestly, the whole relatable villain thing is I don't hate the idea, but I hate the idea that having a quote unquote relatable villain is needed for a better story.
Yeah, you can have a fantastic story with a villain that no one can relate to. We point again to someone like, I don't know, Luca Blight or Kefka.
Yep.
They're completely unsympathetic, unsympathetic villains.
If
but
you
they're
want a comic book
compelling.
example, Apocalypse. There's nothing relatable about that thing. Apocalypse is just evil.
I'd say both Apocalypse and while I'm at it, I may as well bring up Darkseid.
Yes.
Especially the way Darkseid is Darkseid is the one person who is able to get under Superman's skin.
Yeah, he's legitimately considered, not done it, but he's considered killing Darkseid before.
Mm-hmm.
Which is pretty... Like, everybody says, oh yeah, Batman doesn't kill people, but Superman, go read or watch or do anything Superman, that isn't the Man of Steel, obviously, because, well, the Man of Steel, decided to make Superman kill somebody, which, good on them, that was actually a good move. But if you look at any of these particular things, you'll see that Superman, just as much as Batman, doesn't kill people. Although Batman has killed people.
Well, he used to run around with, like, machine guns and shit. Like, he was, back in the early days, he was essentially, I don't want to say a plagiarism, but he was an homage to the Shadow.
I'd say, yeah, that can certainly be said, and especially given the whole thing of the Grey Ghost in the animated series. But and although Batman, although the story that had always been relayed to me was that the big inspiration for Batman was Zorro.
I can see that.
Surprised me.
Yeah.
But speaking of villains getting under the hero's skin, I'd like to, it's often said that the Daleks are the one threat in Doctor Who that is the one that can get under his skin more than any other recurring villain in his rogues gallery. Even the Master can't get under his skin the way the Daleks can.
Even the Cybermen can't.
The Cybermen are a horror story unto themselves, and I have my own theory as to why. But why do you suppose that even in the early days the Daleks ended up becoming the dominant Doctor Who villain?
They were the only other force that could time travel. They were the only other force that could do the same things the Time Lords could, and that makes them a humongous threat.
I'd say something that certainly doesn't hurt is the fact that they have on more than one occasion pushed him into places that his ethics would normally not put him into.
Yes. Because of the fact that since they are at the same level of power he is concerning time travel, he absolutely has to be the most on guard against them and consider the most tactics against them. It's almost a point of no choice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Porkchop does rightfully point out that the only people that Doctor Who has ever pulled a gun on are the Time Lords, but we already know why Rassilon and the Doctor have an issue. And we know why the Doctor locked everyone behind a time prison for the last war of Gallifrey.
Mm-hmm.
Yup.
That's at that point that's a different issue because the Time Lords aren't technically part of a rogues gallery for Doctor Who. They're just an element he has to deal with. The Time Lords in general are they vary as much as any human does because he's dealt with Time Lords that aren't the Master in different ways.
Let's consider how that exchange played in Genesis of the Daleks.
Mm.
Where he ends up getting a time boot on his TARDIS thanks to because the Time Lords want him to do a job, and he's like, I'm not doing it. Whatever you want me to do, I'm not doing. And the Time Lord just says Daleks, and immediately goes, "Tell me more."
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Sounds about right.
But even with that, let's not forget that in that same story, he had a perfect opportunity to completely wipe out the Daleks just by touching a few strings together.
And he didn't.
Instead, all that he did was delay them.
Yep.
What was it? The only time I can ever really remember him doing any serious damage to the Daleks, it wasn't even him that did it. It was his companion, Rose.
Just remember, the safe word is bad wolf.
Fuck.
Ah, yes.
No, the safe word has to be in Welsh, Monk. It's Blythe Droog.
As long as there aren't sheep involved, I'm just saying.
But I think one obviously there was intended to be a bit of a Nazi analog when it came to the Daleks, but more importantly, I think part of the reason it ended up sticking was a couple things. One of them was the design, having something that is equal parts power armor and tank.
Paint roller and plunger. Paint roller and plunger, Monk.
Look, you had to make do. You had to make do with what you could get, especially given how low ass budget these shows were at the time.
Oh, I know. I'm just laughing about it.
But the bigger thing was the voice. Being mechanical and yet still full of that amount of rage.
I'm not going to try and imitate those voices.
Yeah. But I think you know what I mean when I say that.
Synthesizing. Oh yeah. Where due to the synthesized and stilted nature of how they speak, they sound artificial. But it's all screaming. It's all shouting.
Mm-hmm. And specifically shouting just the sheer amount of hatred they have for anything that isn't Dalek. And I'd say this kind of thing was turned on its head when Doctor Who came back, because the best example of that kind of mindset was when you had the Ninth Doctor literally foaming at the mouth with how much he when yelling at that one surviving Dalek.
Yeah, he was not happy to see a surviving Dalek.
No, and the things
scared the shit out of Rose too.
Well, he was perfectly. He had almost a smile when he said "exterminate" and then flipped a switch that electrocuted that same Dalek.
Yep.
And that ended up becoming a theme throughout it of kind of the darkness that was in the Time Lord himself.
Well, I mean, he's been around a very long time.
I'd actually say the best example of that kind of thing was the whole Time Lord Victorious with the Waters of Mars,
Mm-hmm.
where he decided in a moment of desperation to break the rules of time to bring someone back to life.
Yep.
said person, in sheer disgust of what he did, committed suicide.
Yep. Of course, now we're going back to the 10th Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, no. The 14th Doctor, who is still the 10th Doctor.
Oh yeah, because aren't they bringing Tennant back?
They're bringing Tennant back. They've explicitly said he remembers his own teeth, which means that the character remembers who he was. And they've also explicitly said that this is not the 10th Doctor, it's the 14th Doctor. Number 14 in the scheme of things.
I'm calling shenanigans.
The whole thing is
Desperation move.
Yeah, it's a desperation move or a Hail Mary, whichever you prefer, because even if some people may like the 13th Doctor, I obviously don't, but I've made clear as to why, because it couldn't figure out what the hell it was trying to be, along with some shitty writing.
Yeah, I felt bad for Capaldi as well because of the shitty writing in his run as well.
Mm-hmm. Especially since Capaldi is acting his ass off.
Capaldi is one of those characters that when they announced him as a Doctor, I was like, this is going to be a really good season, and then it was shit, and I went, what did they do to Capaldi?
It wasn't his fault. You can only do so much when you've got bad writing.
No, I know. That was exactly the problem, and I was just like, man, they ruined Capaldi on this season.
Yeah, they This is an example of bad writing in general, people.
Yeah.
Not just villains, but when your hero sucks, there's a problem.
But at the end of the day, people were not watching Jodie. They were not watching Jodie Whittaker's run as the Doctor.
Yep.
And obviously the people who were did not have nice things to say on the matter, and the BBC did not do themselves any favor by trying to gaslight their own critics in the fan baiting method.
Yep.
But since we mentioned Darkseid earlier, I do find him an interesting contrast when compared to Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
Thanos is portrayed as the ultimate nihilist in the comics. Darkseid is the ultimate tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that I know it's tempting to say, of course, he's the ultimate tyrant, given the rule over Apocalypse, but I don't mean tyrant in terms of the oppressive ruler, but more tyrant in the Greek sense. You know, the absolute ruler with no restrictions.
Sic semper tyrannis.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, there is one sort of villain equivalent that some people really have a fetish for doing that I have just been sick of, and that is taking the biggest Boy Scout and trying to turn them evil.
Yes, we've done a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we've done a whole episode, and in a lot of those cases, there isn't a opposite. If you were to do that with say an evil Batman,
Which has been done.
Mm-hmm. Then I think it's just as important to go all in with that kind of concept and turn the villains into heroes, which has also been done.
There are certain villains that could be heroes, but I believe there are also certain members of the Rogues Gallery that should never be made heroes. When it comes to Batman, the Joker.
Yeah.
You never try to make the Joker a hero; he's never going to be.
As much as I dislike the New 52 as a rule, the Forever Evil arc, which brings in the Injustice League or whatever they're called, the alternate
Lords, I believe they're called.
Yeah, Owlman and all them.
That was the Crime Syndicate.
Crime Syndicate. Thank you. I couldn't remember what they were called.
The Evil Justice League are the ones that are still technically good guy Justice League, but they're bad guys.
Yeah. But yeah, those characters, they largely had to be fought by Lex Luthor and a bunch of other villains because most of the heroes had gone missing.
And
And I thought that was
We've also been over how Lex Luthor is only a villain because, well, he doesn't trust Superman to be a hero.
pretty much.
yeah, and I know. I'd say Luthor is, when properly written, the way that the whole hero of his own story should be done.
Yes, he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong, and he believes that Superman's a detriment to humankind, which I can see his argument. I think anyone can.
Especially when he let's consider somebody like Luthor.
Mm-hmm.
He even with his baldness, he is usually portrayed as someone in peak physical condition. He is a successful businessman. He is obviously very intelligent. So you have essentially somebody who has this sort of peak of humanity thing, and yet no matter how hard he would train, study, or the like, Kal-El, Superman, Clark Kent would always be so far above him
Because he's not human.
Mm-mm. And I'd say
I can't really say it's racism either, because I don't think he hates him inherently just because of his race. He hates the way that Luthor always portrays it in all the good times I've ever seen him written, which includes animated series and a lot of the video games.
I'd also throw in All-Star Superman with that.
Yep. Luthor's whole thing about Superman, even in ones where Superman is clearly a bad guy, Hello Red Sun, is that you are not a human from Earth, and there's always a chance you can leave. And if you leave, all the people who rely on you will be forsaken. That's always been Luthor's take on it. Humans need to protect humans because we can't rely on these aliens that will just fly off into space. It's an extreme point of view, sure, but is it wrong?
Only in execution, because once again, the methods make the means moot,
Exactly.
or make the ends moot, I should say.
Yeah.
This is the reason I like using the allegory of someone who would burn down a forest to prevent loggers.
To prevent deforestation.
Yeah. Which I know that sounds ridiculous, but is it really But that's not far removed from what Luthor in this case is arguing.
Yes.
I also want everybody to remember that when you say if Superman was in the real world he'd be a power-hungry tyrant, you are making the exact argument that Luthor would make. You're welcome.
And that's not necessarily a bad argument to make. Note that we say that what the issue is here is not that the argument is bad, but that the methods are bad.
Mm-hmm. And
Hey guys, I'm gonna call it a night. See you guys.
Thanks for stopping in, JT.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night, man.
Hey, Frosty. But I think what's also important when it comes to villains is you don't necessarily need to have them be multi-layered, but you do have to present them as some degree of obstacle that you'd want to see taken down in one form or another.
Yeah.
One example that immediately comes to mind from me. I know some people are going to get on the fainting counts for me bringing praise to this particular series, but I want to talk about Rurouni Kenshin again.
Awesome. All
And-
those people who are going to fucking clutch at pearls because of the author, eat shit. We can separate the author from their works here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Rurouni Kenshin's a good story despite the author's predilections for children.
Well, that in actuality, there's one of the major themes is whether or not somebody who has tendencies that don't fit within society can change, which is why I found that particular incident to be a bit of irony. Since, well,
He wrote a story about someone who did, in fact, change for the better.
but there are multiple cases of strong villains that I can use when it comes to Rurouni Kenshin, especially with its theme. But there are two in particular that I'd say are standouts. Zan, if you had to guess, which two would you say I'm referring to?
Standout villains?
As standout villains when it comes to a lot of the themes with Rurouni Kenshin as a whole.
Shishio Makoto is the first one. for
Yep.
sure, because he's the replacement for Batosai who couldn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not even trying to kill him could change him. In fact, it made him worse.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the second one, even though he later turns into sort of an anti-villain, Hajime Saito, because he continued to be a murderous bastard even after the end of the Bakumatsu.
That is a good instance, but that's not exactly who I was going with for the second one.
You're
know that-
Shishinomori?
I don't think he was going for Shinomori either.
No.
I know you weren't going for his brother-in-law, because his brother-in-law, well, we don't talk about that arc, remember?
I only bring it up in a conceptual sense because of the character that he used to introduce himself, Jinshu.
Mm-hmm.
And now, admittedly, as far as villains go, Enishi is nowhere near as strong as Shishio.
Mm-hmm.
In both appearance and in abilities.
Yeah, Enichi's absolutely... he's lackluster, I'm gonna be honest. Oh, he's got glasses and the nerves. He's got super nervous nerves. And
Well-
then you've got Mr. Wrapped in Bandages, can't sweat anymore, is super hot Shishio Makoto. Jesus Christ.
That
Swordsmans are just so good.
and the fact that his particular fighting style is the complete opposite of Kenshin.
Yep.
Even in his days as the Batosai, Kenshin was always extremely precise. Was basically, and a lot of times would rather take someone out with one or two strikes, or even just the sword drawn being enough to take someone out.
Because Batojutsu was his thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, for all of you out there, Batojutsu is just the fighting form of Iaijutsu. In so much that it's all about drawing the sword quickly. But Batojutsu also features returning the sword to the sheath.
Mm-hmm. But contrast that with Shishio, who is first off, there's that whole thing of using human fat and a serrated blade to make the sword catch fire.
Mm-hmm.
Which, obviously, the sciencey among you will know that there's no way you could make that work. But at least appreciate the attempt.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be honest here. They tried to say that by putting your non-dominant foot forward or I should say, putting the same foot forward to where your sheath is, somehow made your Iaijutsu draw impossibly fast and strong. No.
Yeah.
No. Remember, we're dealing with a little bit of historical fantasy here. I would say that that's partially magic.
Yeah. But oddly enough, I'm perfectly willing to work with that because it's at least consistent within its own story.
Yes, absolutely.
It's almost like if you consistently follow your own rules.
Like we mentioned at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But so human fat on a grooved blade so it catches fire from your body heat? Sure, why not? Being able to draw at near supersonic speeds just because you put a different foot forward? Sure, why not?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with that. The fact that the Amakakeru Ryu no Hirameki somehow causes his muscles to decay? Not okay with that one.
The way it always
is that the succession technique?
Yes. The fact that I remember the Japanese name is to this day, when I first read the manga ages ago, is a testament to how much I love that fucking name.
Yeah.
The only reason I remember the Hirameki portion is I watched the live action movies a couple of years ago.
Which we've talked about in the past. The live action Kenshin movies are an exception to the live action dynamic
adaptations, yeah.
But because of the fact that it's basically a period piece with extra steps, I maintain that bringing it up for the purposes of that is kind of cheating.
It is. Regardless, though, yeah. Even though Inishi is technically the opposite, the foil to Kenshin in a certain way,
mm-hmm.
It's a foil to a Kenshin that has already changed. Like Makoto being the foil to Kenshin during that arc makes sense because Kenshin is still doubting who he is that entire time. It's taking constant friendly pressure from Kaoru and from everyone else in his life, Sanosuke, everyone.
Just seeing Saito again almost brought him to his old self.
Yes, absolutely. Seeing Saito again nearly turned him right back into Batosai.
Then there was fighting that was it the kid that does the hopping on his back foot? Like that, he almost went full savage in that fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the point is that during all of this, Kenshin is still struggling to be someone new, to no longer be a Hitokiri, a manslayer.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to just be himself, Kenshin Himura. And when we get to Inishi, at that point, he's mostly become himself. The entire reason the Inishi arc exists is to resolve his ghosts with his ex-wife.
Mm-hmm.
What was her name? Tomoe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we've covered in detail the relationship between Kenshin and Tomoe when we did that Parliament episode on Suyokuken.
Yep. Suyokuken. Yeah.
Yep. But
the Inishi is less effective because he's only there as a resolution device. And once it's resolved, even he doesn't really have a thread. We see this teaser of him after having poked out his own eardrums and lost to Kenshin, kind of as a straggler in the slum part of a city, and someone trying to show him pity, and that's really the last we see of him.
Mm-hmm.
And
the other
time skip.
Something that I think is vastly underrated whenever it comes to major arcs in a lot of shonen battle manga that have multiple protagonists is each and this was something that really dawned on me when I did my blitz through of Fairy Tail. when each character that we focus on has some sort of thematic opposition, and I mentioned that this dawned on me with Fairy Tail, but you see this just as much in other shonen battle manga. You have seen it in Hiroaka, but that's a whole other story. You've certainly seen it in Bleach, and you can see it in One Piece at times, but One Piece is all over the place, so I'm hesitant to bring that up.
And I still insist that Luffy is not a good main character for a shonen battle manga.
Mm-hmm.
I will never stop saying that until the day I die.
And you definitely saw that quite a bit with Naruto. It's been a while since.
The entire reason Sasuke and Naruto existed was foils to each other.
Yeah, I would say that. I'd say if I'd use another, I'd say you also have this same dynamic when it comes to stuff like Soul Eater and Fire Force.
Yeah, there's absolutely in a lot of these stories there's a villain which faces our heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually a villain that corresponds to our main hero.
There's one that corresponds to our main hero and one that corresponds to the other heroes among the main hero's party, for lack of a better term. And hell, when we were discussing how to do the UA Great Lakes project, we were kind of leaning into that with the main arc we were considering.
Mm-hmm.
That being a rival clan to the Heiko.
Yep, the Heiko's enemy ninja clan.
Mm-hmm.
And enemies to Scottish ninjas. Those enemy ninjas must be suicidal.
Or French.
Same thing, tautology.
I was gonna use either French or they may be maybe they're English.
Again, tautology.
But I think the reason that it took going through Fairy Tail the way I did for this kind of thing to dawn on me is that Fairy Tail does this particular team versus team with every arc,
which gets old. You can't have that with every arc.
You certainly can't. But for me, I was by that point I was looking at Fairy Tail less as a story and more as a repository to give me ideas for campaigns.
Yeah, I mean I understand the team dynamic. If we go back to Kenshin here.
Mm-hmm.
You had the team dynamic when Kenshin first faced down Shinomori and his men.
Mm-hmm.
And then again with Makoto. But Inishi really faced them just by himself for the most part.
The Inishi had a group of associates, but
it wasn't the same.
No, none of them were really. I'd say the biggest example of the opposites was I forget his name, but he was that monk who was meant to be the opposite for Sonosuke.
Sonosuke. The one who originally taught him the Futai no Kiwami, I believe.
Yeah, and seemed to be a very radical monk worshipping a god of fire.
Oh, do you mean Anju or Anji or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah. I still like how Sano beat him was with what he called with the 3-part version instead of a 2-part version.
Mm-hmm.
By flinging his fingers outward. that was actually pretty fucking cool. It's like Sano was like, I can't do it with all the parts of my body like you can, but guess what I can do? 3 stages, bitch. It's like, yes.
But that's I bring that up just to illustrate the approach when it comes to villains or antagonists in that particular genre.
Mm-hmm.
However, even Berserk dipped into that kind of thing a bit when it came to Guts' party versus the Apostles, especially during the Millennium Falcon arc.
Yeah. I would say, though, that when it came to that, even though in Guts' party versus the Apostles, there were supposed to be Apostles that were the foils for other parts of the party, most of the time, it was just Guts fighting Apostles with the party giving him support strats.
Sometimes support and whether it be moral or otherwise, I'd say the one who
with all your magic support.
Yeah, the magic support to keep the beast of darkness from going hog wild again.
From going ape shit while he's in berserker mode.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot remember the character's name, but I know the little girl.
Yeah, Shirka.
Yep.
Shirka, thank you.
Yeah, that was who I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying do that whole opposite teams thing with any arc, but it is something that can be utilized when it's needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd say it's if you have multiple characters whose story you're focusing on, that's the best time to do it, which is probably why it's something that would be natural for our stuff, because I think in each of the stories where we've built a setting or built an arc that we didn't have to use pre-existing stuff, we have never done the hero and rival dynamic. We've instead doubled down on it. Literally.
I mean, if you look at all the original stuff we've had to make with our Ruby reconstruction, Monk.
Well, I'm not talking about just that, but also the magical shonen thing where we had two protagonists instead of one.
Mm-hmm.
We have that with UA Great Lakes, where the two central protagonists are Finn and Kyle.
Yep. Also, Porkchop asks about Scottish ninjas. Finn Heiko comes from a clan of half Japanese, half Scottish ninjas.
Mm-hmm.
That's why his first name is Finn. That's the Scottish part, and Heiko is the Japanese clan name.
Yeah.
But you know what? This is all just one giant ancient Chinese secret.
God damn it. I knew you were going to go there. Also, hi, JVK. But now, when it comes to other console style RPGs, it's a little bit tricky to find a strong antagonist in some of them, especially when it comes to the Tales series and Star Ocean. Even Valkyrie Profile to an extent doesn't really have the closest thing that Valkyrie Profile ever had to a strong antagonist was probably Lazard.
Yep, Lazard Valeth. The second sort of option would be the wizards from Daipan, but you only briefly deal with them, so they're not a major part of the story.
Yeah, and as far as the major antagonist in Lenneth, it obviously that depends on the ending. It could just as easily be Odin or Surt.
Yep.
But the problem with both of them is that much like some of the other cases we've talked about, they don't have that much impact in terms of what you're doing directly.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Which is why despite its faults, I consider Silmaria to be a more interesting narrative than the original.
You want to know an example of a villain who is a great villain without having much interaction of the story that we've completely skipped over?
Who?
Or what? Much interaction with the protagonists, because he only ever really interacts directly with the protagonist in maybe 3 episodes. Vicious.
I would say Vicious is the case of getting the most from the least.
Yes, he's a fucking ghost, but whenever he fucking shows up, people are terrified and fucked. And the only times he ever really interacts with any part of the main cast is the times he sees, well, Spike. And that's like a total of 3 to 4 episodes.
Ballad of Fallen Angels, Jupiter Jazz, The Real Folk Blues.
Yeah.
That's a total of 5 episodes if we want to get technical.
Technical.
Oh.
Yeah,
You are
man.
technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Yeah, Vicious is a phenomenal example of getting more from less.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I would be, as embarrassing as it sounds, there have been times where I reenacted the church scene from Ballad of Fallen Angels with some of my friends, and guess who got stuck with the role of playing Vicious?
You?
Yep.
Nice.
That doesn't fit at all. You don't have any hair.
Fuck off.
Hey,
Nice.
at least this time it wasn't a black joke.
I think the reason that I end up getting stuck with Vicious is, for one, when I was doing acting, for whatever reason, I would always end up getting villain roles.
Mm-hmm.
I know it'd be tempting to make a black joke out of that, but I honestly think it was because I was the tallest guy there.
Yeah, you were the most intimidating because of your height.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know how that feels.
But
I do not. I'm a midget.
I mean, we're both 6'6", so lots of people are midgets to us.
I was about to say, do you have any idea how little that narrows it down? Brian asked about our thoughts on the Major from Hellsing.
I mean, he's a fantastic villain.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very
Legitimately.
clear. It's very clear that his ethos is not because of Nazism. It's just Nazism was a.
It was the means. The Nazis allowed him to pursue what he actually cared about. He does not give a single shit about Nazism or its ideology or anything like that.
He just wanted to create super soldiers and fucking live forever.
No.
It's even simpler than that. For the Major, the Nazis were a convenient vehicle for him to pursue his love, nay, his obsession, waging war.
He outright says it in that speech about how much he loves war. Not that he likes war. He loves war in all of its capacity. Whether it be victory or defeat, whether it be in honorable contests or outright slaughters. The weapons, the tactics, the wins, the losses, everything encompasses his love of war.
Do you mind, Monk? I have the speech.
Go ahead.
My friends, it has often been said that I like war. My friends, I like war. No, friends, I love war. I love holocausts. I love blitzkriegs. I love defensive lines. I love sieges, charges. I love mop-up operations and retreats. Wars across prairies, in streets, in trenches, in grasslands, in frozen tundras, through deserts, on the sea, in the air. I love every act of war that can occur upon this earth. I love blasting the enemy to smithereens with artillery salvos that thunder across the lines of battle. My heart leaps with joy whenever a soldier is tossed high into the air and cut to pieces by well-placed sniper rounds. And there is nothing like a tank operator using a Tiger Act to destroy enemy tanks. And the feeling that comes when a soldier runs screaming from his blazing tank only to be mowed down by heavy machine gun fire is such an exquisite feeling. Like when ranks of infantry brandish their bayonets rushing into the enemy line, it moves me deep within my heart to watch a fresh recruit stabbing over and over into the bloated chest of a long-dead enemy. The sight of deserters being strung up from a street lamp is an irresistible pleasure, and there is nothing more arousing than the sounds made by prisoners of war dropping like flies, screaming in agony as they're mowed down by ear-piercing schmeisers, excuse me. when a band of pitiful resistance fighters makes their final stand with nothing but small arms, only to have their city smashed to atoms, block by a 4.8 ton bombshells, I'm in ecstasy. I love it when my forces are ravaged by a Russian armored division. It's so sad to see towns and villages that were supposed to be defended at all costs being laid to waste, their women and children being raped and killed. I love to be squashed under the heel of the British and American war machines. The humiliation as my men crawl around like vermin, ducking the Jagdbombers flying overhead. Gentlemen, all I ask for is war so grand as to make hell itself tremble. Gentlemen, I ask you as fellow brothers in arms, what is it that you really want? Do you wish for further war as I do? Do you wish for a merciless bloody war? A war whose fury is built with iron and lightning and fire? Do you ask for war to sweep in like a tempest, leaving not even ravens to scavenge from this earth? Very well. Then Krieg is what you shall have. We are a clenched fist, ready to strike down all who oppose us with our might. But, after enduring over half a century wallowing in darkness, for us a simple, ordinary war will no longer be sufficient. We need a massive war, a war beyond any other that man's history has ever known. We are but a single battalion, the remnants of a defeated army numbering less than 1,000 strong. However, I believe that each of you old warriors is equal to 1,000 of their sickly, soft children. We represent a force that could easily defeat an army of 1,000,001 men. It is time for them to awake the ones who sent us screaming into oblivion, and who now lie sleeping. Let's drag them out of the bed by the hair and remind them of what we are. We'll remind them of what it feels like to live in fear. We'll remind them of the sounds of our jackboots make against their throats. We will remind them that there are more things between heaven and hell than are dreamt of in their philosophy. A Kampfgruppe of 1,000 vampires is going to burn this world down to ash. Yes, my friends, soon Europe's charred remains will illuminate the night sky. I've brought you all back just as I promised I would. Back to our favorite battlefield. Back to our beloved war. At last, the sea lion has crossed the ocean and is heading up the hill. Attention, all soldiers of the Millennium Battalion. This is a message from your commander. Friends, let's bring them hell. I fucking love that speech.
Yeah. But the thing is, in a roundabout way, the Major ended up winning, at least.
Absolutely.
Because, and this ended up becoming a theme in the latter half of how what Alucard truly wants is to be slain by a man. And
Which is why he weeps when Anderson turns himself into a monster.
Well, when Anderson stabbed himself with Helena's nail, he was absolutely furious.
Mm-hmm.
Because here he saw Anderson, who even though he was post-human with his regeneration abilities, which were somehow negated because of the Jackal's bullets. I think it's probably because of the fact that the tissue would burn out on impact.
Mm.
Instead of being an explosive round like the rounds in the castle.
Mm.
But more importantly, even with that modification, Anderson was still human.
Yes. And Helena's nail turned him into something inhuman.
What he referred to it as one of God's monsters.
Yep.
That even if it's done in the name of God, you still become a monster at the end of it.
Mm.
Whereas the Major, even with half of his body being clockwork,
cybernetics.
Yeah. He was still human.
Yep. And he actually did manage to outsmart Alucard.
Mm-hmm. Using the ultimate Xanatos gambit with Schrodinger, by basically relying on a paradox.
It took Alucard years to kill every other version of himself.
Mm-hmm. Which does still technically mean that Schrodinger's still stuck in him.
More like he has Schrodinger's powers now.
Mm-hmm.
So now Alucard really never can die.
Yeah.
Sucks to be him.
I mean, he isn't all powerful anymore because he had to literally slay all the souls he had ever consumed over his long vampiric life before he could come back.
And as was made very clear when level 0 was unlocked.
It's over millions, literally millions of souls.
Enough to cause floods through the streets of London, and there was also all the souls that he consumed when he was a bit famished during his fight with Walter.
And any vampires he had taken.
Mm-hmm.
Because we saw Luke and Jan Valentine show up. We saw Rip Van Winkle show up. We saw Alhambra show up, or whatever. I always say his name wrong.
Tobricane Alhambra.
Yeah, I was right then. Alhambra was the correct way.
Mm-hmm. Dandy Man, if you need something with less syllables.
Yeah, the guy with
Man,
the
if you want to go with the abridged version.
the guy with the deck of cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy with the magic fingers and
Yeah.
magic hands.
Yes.
But the big reason that I say that he had won is, well, for one, despite his love for war, up until that point he couldn't shoot for shit.
Mm-hmm.
And also, even with that victory, it was a Pyrrhic victory, because after Millennium was taken out, everything was treated as just a massive terrorist attack.
Yep, they didn't want to give recognition to the Nazis. But I also doubt the Major would have cared who it was attributed to as long as they gave them war. So no matter what, the Major won.
Mm-hmm. And of course there's the fact that the Helsing organization was running on a slowly draining hourglass.
Yep.
I.e., eventually Integra would pass on, and the organization would become a state-run thing.
Eventually, Integra would pass on, and it would become a state-run thing because Integra's still a fucking virgin.
Mm-hmm. And although I think by that point it's less even if
for Alucard, and you fucking know it.
there is certainly that. I'd say there's also the fact that that anybody who would try and court Integra would end up running away screaming.
I mean, she's in love with a vampire. What do they have to offer?
Oh, this is the same person. This is the same woman who, through sheer force of intimidation, managed to get one of Anderson's associates to light her cigarette, or cigar, I should say.
Yes. I remember that from was it Helsing Ultimate?
Hmm.
Yeah, and if Kota Hirano had ever written more to the epilogue, I mean, except for the times where she didn't have her killer butler because he betrayed her.
Mm-hmm.
But she was a good combatant in her own right too. But I think if Kota Hirano had ever written more to an epilogue than what he did, it definitely should have been a happy ending for Integra and Alucard. I'm sorry. They are a perfect match made in hell and completely suit each other.
Do you think that eventually she would have chosen to become a vampire, or just have gone into old age?
I think she would have become a vampire.
I think she would have gone into old age. And I think Alucard, even if she had requested it, wouldn't have turned her into a vampire because he wouldn't want her to become a monster like him. And I think he would have told Ceres not to do it either. And since she is his offspring, she'd have to obey that order. And but I also think Integra wouldn't have asked him anyway because she doesn't want to become a monster, and he loves humanity in all of its ages.
I do recall that when he saw Walter's form after he had taken the vampirism treatment, that he found his older form. I think his words were in the manga 1,000,000 times more beautiful, and that was something that wasn't carried over into Hellsing Ultimate, I think.
It was. It wasn't phrased this, or it wasn't translated the same way, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if we look at what he says to the Queen of England when he sees her, he finds the Queen of England, since she's so old, more beautiful than ever, he said.
Mm-hmm.
Because they used to be lovers when he was a little girl. Thank you, Hellsing the Origin. But, I mean, now I guess Alucard would be very sad in this day and age since, Queen Elizabeth has passed.
Mm-hmm.
But,
if you were... I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did some bit of fan art with Alucard at her deathbed or something like that, even though that is ridiculous.
At the Queen of England's deathbed, I could see it. I could see someone who's an anime fan doing that.
Yeah.
But if there was such an epilogue, I think that that we absolutely would see Alucard at least staying by Integra's side until she passed, and then wandering off again. And Ceres would probably stay with Hellsing. But I'd like to posit something here, as long as we're talking about villains and Hellsing and our love for the Major as a villain.
Mm-hmm.
The other villain of this story is Alucard.
Very much so. In fact, he's treated like something that is set out against prey like a dog on a leash.
Mm-hmm. Our heroes, if we have to talk about them, are definitely Integra and Ceres until Ceres accepts her vampirism fully.
Mm-hmm.
And then she herself becomes a sort of anti-hero leading into a villain. Because vampires in this setting, by very nature, cannot be good. They are not heroes. They are vicious, murdering things. Even Ceres is one. As much as she still keeps her naive charm for certain things, even after drinking Pip and, killing Zoran, I believe her name was.
Yeah.
Scythe bitch whose head she grinds down like a goddamn eraser.
Mm-hmm.
I love that scene.
That scene is so damn good.
It's a good culmination in response to the mindfuckery that Zoran had been doing up until that point.
Yeah. Ceres at that point has become the thing her master is. A no-life queen. She has become a master of the night. Mm-hmm. She has become the vampire that she was always going to be. And just as other vampires in the setting, she is cruel, she is tactless, at least when it comes to serious matters. She is arrogant, and she is powerful. All the things a vampire should be. But that also is what makes them monstrous. And because they are monstrous, they are not heroes.
Yeah.
Even Anderson was more of a hero than anybody else on the Hellsing side.
He was certainly a zealot, and to be fair, there's a bit of zealotry in every member of Section 13 of Iscariot.
Yeah, it's definitely a story of evils fighting each other with good merely trying to keep things in a little, says Pork Chop about their zealotry. But the story of Hellsing is the story of us watching a villain we like tear down other villains. It's like watching two heels fight in a squared circle, and one of those heels is just that goddamn charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
Name a round, Monk. Just name a round you think fits that. Name a card.
Pork Chop had a funny follow-up statement, like Noah's sled was a little wet.
Oh, if I want to go with that idea of
Heels facing each other down.
Yeah, the big example that a lot of people will point to when it comes to a heel versus heel match is Shawn Michaels versus Rick Martel at I think it was at that same SummerSlam in Wembley where they both agreed to not hit each other in the face.
Mm-hmm.
But truth be told, what you're seeing when you're seeing two monsters is akin to seeing two kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. People may root for Godzilla in those movies, but I'd hesitate to call any of the kaiju a good guy. Even Mothra, who people portray as benevolent, I would hesitate to call her that, especially since
Gamera, who's often seen as like a protector of mankind.
Mm-hmm. I would hesitate on that matter, and I know I said that Evangelion was trying to be a deconstruction of Super Robot, but as time has gone on, I think the target of deconstruction was actually Ultraman.
Okay.
Especially with the 3-minute timer when an AVA unit isn't plugged in.
5. That's 5 minutes. They have 5 minutes of electricity left.
Yeah, it's still a timer.
Yes, absolutely.
And the sole reason the timer thing was introduced into Ultraman was because it was felt that otherwise Ultraman would be too powerful.
Yeah, there would be no sense of crisis.
Mm-hmm. So the color timer and the 3-minute time limit was added in at the last moment, even though, as the series has gone on, the idea of 3 minutes is debatable. Right. It's about as stretched as the 99.9 seconds in Garo.
That being Garo Vanishing Line?
Any Garo.
Ah, fair.
But I have my preferences for the live-action stuff than the animated stuff when it comes to Garo. I will note that.
I like both.
I like both, but much like with the pitching thing we talked about earlier, eventually you gotta pick one. But when it comes to when it comes to villains overall, I think having a presence that is portrayed as a step above the protagonist that they have to overcome is one of the crucial things. The other is, I'd say, another pillar is they don't need to have a sympathetic backstory, but they do need to have a presence of character.
Yes. And concerning both of these pillars that we've just talked about,
mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had one more pillar to announce. If you do,
I think the third one is that if you are going to have a sympathetic backstory, do not forget that their methods still make them villainous.
Yes.
In other words, just because they may be the hero of their own story, does not actually mean that they're the hero of this story.
Yeah, they are villains for a reason. It's usually the methods, their actions that make them villainous.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a good point for me to come in with my own punching bag, the thing I hate most, Tomura Shigaraki from Hiroaka.
Which I am patiently waiting for the end of Hiroaka because I have something in mind for it. Something perhaps a little bit ambitious.
I am looking forward to that.
I don't
But-
know what Hiroaka is.
My Hero Academia.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah,
Um,
I understand now.
So, as many of you may have heard my rant in the past, although not everybody has, I stopped reading Hero Academia because a villain overstayed their welcome. It was a villain who didn't change, whose motives were not compelling, whose actions were spurious and arbitrary. And then on top of all that was given a sympathetic backstory, even though that did nothing to change their villainous ideal. Tomura Shigaraki is a character that is no longer a good foil for our main characters at all. Hasn't been for a while. Hasn't been since prior to Overhaul appearing. And that's early on. There was a point in... an arc now 2 years ago, so embargo's over, people, where Shigaraki was basically being was basically being given a medical enhancement by a doctor who I forget his quirk because I honestly don't want to think about that arc that much anymore. But this process put him into a medically induced coma, stuck him in his head, and it was said multiple times that if this process was ever interrupted before it was complete, he would fail to ever come back. So if he was left in this coma and the process was not allowed to complete, he would stay in a coma forever. And the heroes invade the hospital where this is all happening and manage to stop it, even though Mirko, I think, loses an arm from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the bunny Tom Girl GF that everybody loves loses an arm. It sucks, I know. And while he's comatose, that's when we find out his terrible backstory and how he was abused and a whole bunch of other shit. And yeah, that's bad. That actually is bad. It doesn't make me like Shigaraki any more than that. And then, because of his body being in some liquid and a live wire touching the liquid, suddenly the electric shock brings him back from the coma he's not supposed to be able to come back to because it's induced by a quirk. And he has all of All for One's powers. Which was this upgrade. This upgrade was to give him All for One's quirk.
Because Horikoshi wanted to do this paralleling with the successors of One for All and All for One.
Yeah. What really pissed me off is that Tomura, in his own thoughts, was going through what drove him to be who he is. And there was a real chance for character development there to give his villainous nature meaning, something compelling. But he doubles down on this all being a childish outlash reaction to his life. Tomura's entire motivation is, I don't like the world, so I'm gonna break it. Just like I don't like a toy, so I'm gonna break it. That's literally it. It's not compelling in the least, and he hasn't grown as a person at all. Whereas Deku has grown well beyond the point they first fought at. Deku is really becoming someone completely different than what he was at the beginning. Really becoming confident, competent, and resourceful. I mean, he was already somewhat resourceful, but really resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to make a foil between the two, you don't make one of them this brute force dipshit who suddenly gets sudden inspirations now that he has All for One. Because he gets, like, when he wakes up, he gets all these inspirations to mix quirks that All for One had stored to do things like block communications and fly at supersonic speeds and shit. It's like, how can he put any of this together? He's never had that type of thought. Half of his teammates are smarter than him, especially Dabi. So
I'd say if there's anyone in the League of Villains that has more of the aura that you'd expect from a proper villain and the motivation to match it, it's Dabi.
Oh, it's absolutely Dabi. I just wish that they had let Tomura die and let Dabi step into the limelight instead of making Dabi a duder antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
No, at the point that Tomura was revived and this bullshit happened, I dropped the manga. And that is a perfect example of how not to write your fucking villain.
I love contrast, as you know. So, who would you utilize as a counterweight when it comes to a villain in their own story?
Muzan.
Gentlemen, I hate to do this, but I am slowly falling asleep, so I need to go pass out.
No worries, man. Stay frosty.
You guys have a wonderful evening, and thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. Kibutsuji Muzan. Demon Slayer.
Reason?
Muzan is crafty. Muzan has always had the same goal since he was made into a demon, and he's always worked towards it. But he always evolves because he's always wary of the demon slayers and who they're essentially descended from. His backstory, while revealed near the end of everything, is not exactly tragic. It's just unfortunate. But he's vicious. He's thoughtful, he's provoking, he has presence, he's charismatic, and most of all, as he changes during the fight, he does everything he can to fight the Demon Slayers who are doing everything they can to restore peace to the world. And this goes up to and including the ending of the manga, which again, it's outside of embargo, fuck you all, where he takes over Tanjiro's body in the final fight. After Nezuko has already been made human again. It is the most bombastic battle. It's just constantly raising stakes at that very climax. And Muzan's pulled out into the sunlight. And he's like, I've got to survive somehow. And he's like, wait a minute, that girl had my blood but didn't turn into something mindless and could be a demon without eating people. Is it something to do with their bloodline? And then he fucking takes over Tanjiro's body. And Tanjiro's fighting in a semi-conscious, unconscious state while Muzan's trying to puppet him for a while. And then it's when Nezuko shows up that she manages to hold him down for the last bit of part, and they managed to burn Muzan out of him. But Muzan was a very compelling villain, even though most of the time he didn't come up against the heroes directly. He was extremely compelling because of the fact that he was crafty, resourceful. He had presence, he had forethought, he had troops that were loyal to him that he used in interesting ways. Muzan is a fantastic villain. Very compelling.
I also think it's interesting that after making his presence known once, in the moment since he had already radically changed his appearance.
Changed his appearance, stayed in an extra dimensional space to keep from being found. He knew that sort of exposure was bad for his plans and bad for him, so he's like, fuck it, gotta use my fingers and my moons instead.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't rage against it. Well, I mean, he raged against it internally, obviously, because he's angry that he has to hide. But he didn't childishly fight against it and go out and try and fight them himself anyway. Muzan was ruthless with everyone, including himself.
Mm-hmm.
Fucking love him. He's a fantastic villain.
Yeah.
All of the upper moon demon. I mean, all of the 12 moons were really compelling demons, to be honest.
And but it's I bring that up because I wanted to at least have a capstone of a proper contrast.
Mhm.
But the point is that there are as many ways to do it right as there are to do it wrong. But but villains will be far more remembered for that are written properly than the ones that are written improperly.
Absolutely.
I know people say that we all remember a car crash, but how vividly do you remember the last car crash you saw?
Not very.
And when it comes to villains that you remember for the wrong reasons, you solely remember those wrong reasons and nothing else.
Yes.
And that is the point that I'd like to leave off. Now, next week's episode of Geek Watch is going to be a little bit earlier on in the night. We are going to try and start around 3 p.m. because it will be the conclusion to the most ambitious project that we've done with the Ruby reconstruction. Next week,
3 p.m. Central.
yes, 3 p.m. Central. Adjust for your own time zones accordingly. As I said, this will be the end of the Ruby reconstruction, and it'll be the last time in a while that I do something multi-part in a reconstruction format like that, unless I'm required to.
Unless you feel insane enough.
This was just a case of me biting off more than I could chew, and pride not letting me let it go.
I don't think we bit off more than we could chew. I think we bit off exactly how much we knew we'd need to chew. That's why it took 4 mouthfuls.
Yeah. But, and of course, I will have my fair share of interviews and the like, including with another TTRPG content creator whose work I've warmed up to and kind of beat us to the punch when covering Veil of the Void and Emberwind, even if he did it differently than we do. And
we all have our own art styles, our own contributions.
Yeah. Wednesday and Thursday, if everything goes as planned, I will have the return of Mark McKinnon to talk about the expansions to Besem 4th Edition that are on the way, and Lou Anders to talk about the Viking-themed 5e campaign that he's developing. It isn't directly related to his Thrones and Bones project, but it's not far off. And Saturday, I will be interviewing Draco Studio, who are all the way down in Mexico, on their book Itza's Guide to Dragon Bonding. I think you can figure out why I'd want to cover that.
Yeah.
And of course, next Sunday, I am technically pulling double duty because I'll be interviewing Simon Todd a few hours before we do the episode proper. By the time it won't take long for the upload, obviously. But that is a story for another time. So until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.